On a cold Russian night of November 9th, 2019, a taxi driver was mundanely passing for St. Petersburg streets when he suddenly heard screams coming from the river. He saw an old man standing in the water, unable to get out due to hypothermia. After unsuccessful attempts to pull him out, the driver decided to call emergency services, but to his surprise, the stranger started pleading him not to do it and to keep attempting to help by himself, but his requests were ignored, and soon emergency services came to rescue. The man, seemingly intoxicated, was immediately put in an ambulance car, where he started shouting incoherent nonsense and refused to be medically examined. He also never let go of his backpack, which he consistently clenched in his arms. After the discovery of a traumatic gun hidden in his pocket, and a police inspection of his belongings, the reason why this backpack was so precious became terribly apparent, as officers found rope, duct tape, and 2 human hands with red manicure cut off at the elbow. The story that led to this moment would soon horrify the whole Russian society, not only by the tragic nature of its events, but also by the fact that the personality standing behind them has been present in YouTube's limelight for a long time, as a part of an obscure internet feud that soon would have to take a dark and absurd turn.
À la santé des amoureux, à la santé du roi de France, et mère pour le roi d'Angleterre qui nous a déclaré la guerre. Le 31 du mois d'août, le 31 du mois d'août, on veut venir selon à nous, on veut venir selon à nous, une frégate d'Angleterre qui pendait la mer et les flots, c'était pour aller à Bordeaux.
Oleg Valerievich Sokolov was born on July 9, 1956, and was able to determine his calling at an early age. His childhood absorption in literature led him to the discovery of historical novels. Walter Scott's Ivanhoe mesmerized him with the heroic spirit of chivalry, while Alexander Dumas' The Three Musketeers were about his interest in French history. In pursuit of his passions, he learned French as a teen and decided to get a historical degree, but actually managed to do so only after getting one in physics and mechanics due to mistaken persuasion by parents and peers. In the 2000s, he became an associate professor at the history department of St. Petersburg State University, the largest university in the city and one of the biggest universities in the country. Throughout his long-lasting academic career, he released over 100 publications primarily focused on research on European war history, as well as general history of the Napoleonic period. Sokolov's contribution to the study and popularization of the subject even allowed him to receive the National Order of the Legion of Honor, the highest French order of merit. But Oleg Sokolov's popularity among a broad audience can be attributed to his style of lecturing. His detailed deep dives were often accompanied by big melodramatic gestures and radiating energy, which showed the professor's passion for his subject. Occasional acting out of scenes from his narratives even encouraged some to say that he perceived his speeches as some form of theatrical performance.
Мои друзья из Франции сказали: о, мы нашли супер копию, там наконец Наполеон на французском языке говорит. Господи, я не мог после Рода Стайкера это безобразие слушать, потому что когда в фильме Род Стайкер говорит, что мы можем делать, мы можем сражаться, и Род Стайкер говорит: what can we do, we can fight! И когда он это сказал, все просто, вот, а на французском языке это было так: qu'est-ce que nous pouvons faire, nous pouvons nous battre, да, мы можем сражаться.
But Many noticed that Sokolov's erratic demeanor extended beyond simple rhetorical methods, and in fact, his emotional outbursts and volatile behaviors were natural traits of his character, which showed themselves from time to time. One of the uploaded edits captures Oleg participating in a hot-headed debate about the role of Alexander I in the start of the Napoleonic Wars.
Александр уже с 1802 года в инструкциях послал, называет Францию врагом, не соперником, а врагом в 802 году. Это никто не может объяснить-то. Почему она враг в 802 году? Почему она враг в 802 году? Он уже пишет инструкцию, как надо готовить войну с врагом в 802-803 году. Да потому что никто не хотел воевать кроме Александра. Никто, ни русская армия, ни австрийская, никто не хотел воевать. Хотел воевать только один маньяк больной, Александр, который был одержим идеей войны. Ничего подобного. Русское дворянство.
Though such extreme instances were relatively sparse, and an average viewer watching his lectures and podcasts would come up with a portrait of a certainly passionate, but mostly discreet and intelligent man was an infrequent glimpse of his famous extravagance.
Раздается команда. Гардову шарже, смирно к атаке. Сабро, марш! Сабли, так сказать, вон. Следующая команда. Отро, рысью. Марш! И медленно начинает набирать рысью. Все больше, рысь становится крупнее. И когда рысь становится уже очень крупной, дальше трубы отдают команду в галоп. О, галоп. Уже дальше переходит на галоп. И раздается следующая команда, когда уже галоп на шарже! По этой команде атаковать. Атаковать. Первая шеренга вот так вот саблю направляет в грудь, так сказать, неприятеля, в шею неприятеля. А следующая шеренга держит либо так, ну вот таким вот образом.
удар.
But the aspect of Sokolov's life that truly reveals his eccentric nature, and that was arguably more significant than his academic endeavors, was his own foundation of Russian historical reenactment movement. Though particular war reenactment events in Russia were conducted by the government and its army as early as the beginning of the 20th century, they were few and far between, and were generally abandoned after World War II. In 1976, Oleg Sokolov not only started a revival of this activity, but founded the first organized movement dedicated to it. As he explains, at the age of 19, he got extremely inspired by an episode from the novel of romantic author Sharon Odier, titled Inés de las Sierras. In the episode, a group of dragoon officers is forced to stay for the night in a mysterious castle, vivid descriptions of which evoked in Sokolov a desire to experience something similar himself. When he talked about it with his friends, they came up with a plan: the bar costumes of French officers from the community theater where Sokolov performed at the time, and stay for a couple nights in the ruins of Koporia Fortress, where they discussed the Napoleonic era and tried to imagine themselves as French troops. Meetings became regular, accumulating more and more people until a full-fledged club was organized that they decided to call the Empire. They also created a charter that outlined the ultimate objective: to establish an organization capable of conducting marches, crusades, and battles using period attires. At the time, such plans were mistakenly perceived as absurd fantasies. Soon, a counter-club was created that represented the Russian army of the same period. In Koporia Castle, they initiated the first battle with the Empire members, which, by modern reenactment standards, turned out to be too real, as both sides received bad injuries. Around 1988, the movement came out of the underground by conducting public marches that went for historical locations related to the events of Napoleon's invasion of 1812. The event was actively covered in the news, which accelerated the creation of many other reenactment clubs around the country. In the early stages of development, a tradition of nicknames was started. The participants decided, if Oleg Sokolov is a ruler of the Empire Club, then it would be logical to treat him as an emperor. From this point on, they always referred to him as Sire. They also considered that the Russian names were ruining the intended atmosphere, so they started to refer to each other using a variety of French names common for the period and often associating themselves with real historical figures from Napoleon's entourage. Members were given specific military ranks as well. This all led to the establishment of a strict hierarchy, on top of which Oleg Sokolov stood.
Bonjour les gars.
In the 1990s, the organization started actively attending reenactment events outside Russia and inviting organizations from other countries. Oleg Sokolov became the president of the first official reenactment union, provided with governmental support. The scale of the battles grew exponentially, as well as Sokolov's status. He became one of the most prominent figures of the European battle reenactment scene. A widespread misconception about Oleg Sokolov is that he literally dressed and presented himself as his idol, Napoleon Bonaparte. In reality, the costume and role that were permanently used by him were those of a divisional general of the First Empire, Louis-Gabriel Suchet. However, his obsession with Napoleon and constant demands to address him as sire, a term used to address the monarch, still kept the comparison between him and Bonaparte as an obvious implication, and, from Sokolov's admission, the only reason why he never literally presented himself that way was because he was afraid to be perceived as crazy. But such precautions weren't able to entirely prevent mixed reactions to his role-play enthusiasm, and he attended some university classes while wearing a costume. Such lecturing was adored at festivals, however.
Я вообще не понимаю, как профессора многие читают лекцию не с коня. Это, без сомнения, не так здорово. Художники изображали генералов в театральной позе. Вы знаете, можно командовать только в театральной позе. Объясняю, потому что в этом грохоте, в этой пальбе, в этих криках, в этом топоте ничего не слышно. И если вы хотите, чтобы ваши солдаты что-то поняли, вот для этого генералы и принимали театральную позу. «En avant! Chargez! Vive l'empereur!» и так далее.
In his pursuit of an authentic portrayal, he was indomitable, often going to dangerous extremes, such as endangering the health of his soldiers by setting up an encampment on a swamp in cold temperatures, and making other controversial decisions to satisfy his need for realism. Some spoke of his cruelty to horses. He was even forbidden to have one in Spain after a horse that he borrowed died. Though the circumstances of the incident are unclear, so it's hard to tell if it was actually caused by Sokolov's actions. His usual behaviors may even suggest that deep down he was trying to recreate the harsh temper of bygone eras in himself. As a commander of the army, he fully saw himself as a person empowered by corresponding privilege and authority, and would freely project it on other reenactors who never stopped recognizing the relationship as a play, something that Sokolov had a hard time doing. His ecstatic state often made him ignore the rules and scripts of the festivals, which caused conflicts with participants and management. One of the most notorious instances of Sokolov's poor conduct, which changed the perception of him for many reenactment clubs, was in 2007. That year, for the first time, the contract for the organization of the annual Borodino battle was put out to tender. Because Sokolov's organization did not understand how to properly apply their documentation, the tender was eventually won by the Borodino Museum. Sokolov, who has now been demoted from organizer to participant, claimed that the loss of his organization was unfair and caused by the arbitrariness of officials. In addition to that, prior to the battle, Sokolov got into an argument with one of the clubs. By that time, the French army that participated in reenactments was not unified, but divided into different clubs that usually represented their specific regiment. But despite their technical independence, the clubs were still obligated to ask for Sokolov's approval when choosing the military ranks of their members. One of the clubs ignored the established hierarchy and independently promoted their member, Dmitry Gorshkov, to the officer rank. Sokolov started repeatedly demanding to reverse the decision, but the management of the club declined, finding Sokolov's monopoly on power unwarranted. The dispute ended with an ultimatum. If the regiment appears with Gorshkov as an officer, his epaulets will be torn off and the club will not be allowed to enter the feud. A few days before the start of the event, the club began to receive SMS threats from Sokolov's entourage. Everyone was preparing for provocation.
По поводу возможных инцидентов между участниками исключен вопрос, я думаю. Это праздник, и никаких выяснений отношений быть не должно здесь. Хорошо? Конечно. Я просто предупреждаю, вот у меня специально для вас, как говорится, заготовлен резерв 100 человек ОМОНа и 7 автозаков.
Sokolov aggressively refused to sign any necessary contracts with the management of Borodino Museum, and the next day, during the introduction of festival's guests, declared an accusatory speech targeted against the organization.
Мы устали от того презрения, с которым относится чиновничество, упорно не замечающее существование военно-исторического движения в нашей стране. Ко мне, Висла, быстро! Олег Валерьевич. Я должен сказать, пока я не завершу свою речь, сражение не начнется. Олег Валерьевич. Если ко мне сейчас прикоснется хоть один сотрудник милиции, сражение не начнется никогда. Олег. И никто не... Я не слышу. Уберите от меня этого человека. Уберите от меня человека. Встать вокруг меня.
Following the order, soldiers armed with spears surrounded Sokolov, separating him from the police and festival staff.
Именно Бородинский музей снова становится организатором этого мероприятия. И снова такое ощущение, что мы здесь никто. Так вот, мы не клоуны и не петрушки. Мы солдаты этих армий.
Luckily, the event continued, and everyone started preparing for the battle. However, according to the description of one of the participants, Sokolov started preparing for the fight of another kind. He and his soldiers went behind the trees, far away from the audience, where the regiment of his officer Dmitry Gorshkov was located. Sokolov ordered to tear off Gorshkov's epaulets and throw him off the field, but no one dared to enter the confrontation until 2 horsemen rode into the opposing crowd. When horses reared up, Sokolov shouted, "Crush them!" At that moment, the police ran out from behind the trees to stop the provocators. 2 horsemen were arrested, the fight was over, and the event continued like nothing happened. Though Sokolov never received any legal consequences, he became persona non grata for the festival and received permission to return to the annual Borodino battle only in 2012. But Sokolov's controversial reputation in reenactment circles was mostly unknown to the mass audience. So, at the beginning of 2018, Oleg Sokolov was known as a famous battle reenactor, a respected professor, and popular guest on internet historical podcasts. However, one day Sokolov's reputation began to be slowly diminished when he made the mistake of creating a critical review of a book of a curious individual with a similarly large ego. The one whose fans prefer to introduce him as Maestro, Yevgeny Panasenkov.
Because my love is near.
Yevgeny Panasenkov claims to be a person of many talents. He's an actor, director, journalist, political expert, singer, scientist, historian, and generally a genius. he has a historical degree that was unfinished due to his inability to defend the thesis, but when he's confronted about it, he usually explains it differently. The professors, who hated him for his talents in free thinking, purposefully put the time of the defense on the same exact date as his opera concert, so, as a sign of protest against the university, unwilling to disappoint his fans, he chose the opera. Years later, when Panasenkov's name became more famous, the university wanted to gain reputation by having him as their graduate, so they started pleading Yevgeny to take his somehow prepared diploma, but he found it humiliating. 10 years have passed, and Panasenkov supposed that the existing diploma has not been taken to this day. When typing his name in a YouTube search, one will stumble upon many clips from political TV shows illustrating his sharp wit. One of the most popular clips, which almost gained 6 million views, captures him participating in debates regarding anti-LGBT laws, where he humiliates a homophobic official.
Вы слышали 8-ю симфонию Чайковского? Слышали, наверное?
Естественно, ну что?
А он всего 6 написал, дорогая.
Да, слушай, да, вот и 18-й слышал, и 25-й слышал,
очень,
все слышали.
Понятно, врать не надо. Почему депутаты все врут? Я не понимаю.
The most popular type of content that you will find on his personal YouTube channel is usually dedicated to him discussing various political, cultural, and historical subjects by providing them with constant self-appraisal. Other videos show him visiting museums, parks, or restaurants while making belittling remarks about people around him. In one of the most notorious videos of this kind, he shares his negative experiences when visiting the Louvre.
Называют торжеством беспусицы и бессмыслицы, да? Когда вот эта девка объясняет вот этим животным Джоконду на iPad. Джоконда висит отсюда 350 метров до водопоя, видишь? Организованной толпой коровы шли на водопой, за всем следят. Да, вот это в шортах даже, это животные в шортах, там вас встречают сразу, что у вас было прекрасное впечатление о Лувре, о Дворце королей. Друзья мои, мы добрались до этажа, где в иглу показывают Джоконду. И, как вы видите, вот это все, весь зоопарк, который абсолютно вообще не понимает, что такое живопись вообще, конкретная живопись Возрождения, итальянская, французская, жанры, вида, ничего. Но оно мешает тем, кто может это посмотреть, может это понять. Причем обратите внимание, что... Да, кстати, учить, что они все воняют, они страшно воняют. Я сейчас отвлекся, потому что каждый это персонаж уродства. Несуразные, немытые, больные, с генетическими отклонениями. Огромная есть Африка, огромная Индия. Они могут там смотреть на баобаб. Зачем им смотреть на маленькую картинку? Вообще вывесили бы им эту Джоконду, репродукцию вниз, там где как корм свиньи. Да, все равно сейчас получается корм свиньи. Потому что все равно это как в хлеву. Это реально как в хлеву. Это просто дерьмо собачье. Все это все нестиранное, все грязное. И я на это все должен почему-то смотреть. Вот я ни в чем не повинный человек в белой рубашке вообще должен на это все смотреть. Да, еще круто.
Comment sections under videos with Panasenkov's presence are usually filled with the following messages: "Bravo, Maestro," "Overplayed them all," "Genius," "Another cheap scum destroyed," as well as a praise of his outstanding singing abilities. And though Panasenkov's moderators, known for their propensity to delete all negative comments, such atmosphere has a larger source. Generally, Panasenkov's audience can be divided into 3 categories. The first considers Panasenkov a hilarious freak and an entertaining troll, deserving of a purely ironical reception. The second, while finding amusement in his narcissistic demeanor and sense of humor, still thinks that he has valuable opinions and expertise in the subjects he talks about. The last type is the one on the verge of a cultish obsession, consisting of people unironically considering Panasenkov a modern Renaissance man, supporting him with charitable donations, and zealously defending him against so-called enviers. But the one thing that all these different groups can agree on is that Yevgeny Panasenkov is an excellent meme generator. His remarkable rhetorical skills, humor, and bizarre narcissism became traits that ultimately propelled him to the internet popularity. But the time when Yevgeny Panasenkov's rapid growth began was in 2017, when he released a historical monograph written in a spirit of historical revisionism with the provocative title, The First Scientific History of the War of 1812. Opinions on the book were extremely divided. The major point of criticism was the pretentious nature of the work. Critics claim the most facts and perspectives that Panasenkov presents is his discoveries and revelations were already part of the academic discourse for decades. Moreover, they usually pointed out a fictitious extension of the book's list of sources and general amateurish work with them, bias and favoritism towards Napoleon, and constant unrelated discretions aimed at deflating the author's ego. Defenders of the book, on the other hand, argued that the book presented the most detailed recollection of the military campaign among Russian works, held overall high educational value, and received especially negative response, mostly due to the personality of its author. Throughout the monograph, and the content dedicated to it, Panasenkov tried to create a narrative that exposed most Russian historians as people hungry for governmental grants and therefore felt for the patriotic bias. This way he was able to justify why he, the person who distanced himself from the academic sphere, was the only one who was able to speak the real truth. To support his status, in the book Panasenkov attacked all major Russian specialists that touched on a topic before him. This made some of them to come up with the critical reviews of the work. Panasenkov in his turn would create video responses conducted in his typical pompous manner.
Она пропечаталась лучше на одну букву. Здесь, видите, ламо М, а у Лёши лано Н, потому что в его библиотечном экземпляре плохо пропечаталась буква Н. Вот всей швали моих критиков, моих завистников, вы думаете, что с человеком, который вот до такой степени точно исследует тему, можно спорить? Вы думаете, что я вас не переиграю? Что я вас не уничтожу? Я вас уничтожу.
That proved to be an effective promotional method, as Panasenkov's popularity only grew as conflicts progressed.
Здравствуйте, дорогие друзья, и что немаловажно, враги, потому что враги это рейтинг. Это рейтинг, это продажи, это, так сказать, эмоции постоянно, потому что друзья, это, они ленивые иногда бывают, а враги нет.
Soon, the video started to attract viewers who weren't interested in a discussed historical subject or later plagiarism dispute. The people simply wanted to take a piece of obscure internet drama and see new hilarious ways in which Panasenkov would troll and humiliate his opponents to then turn those moments into memes.
Ты лузер, шавка, шваль, ты дешевка, шавка, шваль, ты лузер, шавка, шваль, лузер, шавка, шваль. Уничтожу.
Oleg Sokolov became the main Panasenkov's critic, although the primary focus of their dispute wasn't revolving around many historical disagreements, as their views were pretty similar. Their conflict was mostly centered around allegations of plagiarism. The confrontation was ignited by one of the passages from the first scientific history. Quote, "In recent years, a great contribution to the study of Napoleonic War era was made by an associate professor of St. Petersburg State University, Oleg Sokolov. His colorfully published Napoleon's Army practically became the first Russian work that tells in detail about the recruitment, uniform, and communal life of the French legions. Of course, for those familiar with the French language, the publications of Sokolov will not communicate much new. And yet, Sokolov did quite a lot to popularize this topic. But unfortunately, Sokolov greatly spoiled his reputation with unpleasant deeds too. As you know, at the forefront of my conception of the conflict between Russia and France lies an understanding that the main initiator of the conflict was the envier of Napoleon, the Russian Emperor, Alexander I. My sensational speeches and publications from the early 2000s are devoted to this. My position became not only known, but widely discussed in scientific circles and even the media. Sometime later, I was informed that Sokolov, in his book on the Battle of Austerlitz, used my conception as the main one, but never listed my works as a source. Moreover, there is almost a verbatim quotation of the final wording without any reference to the author. For example, quote, "Not much objective circumstances are to blame for this conflict, but rather the personal actions of one person, Russian Emperor Alexander I. So Russia, and with it all of Europe, were dragged into a stupid, unnecessary, bloody war, most if not all responsibility for which holds the Emperor Alexander I." End quote. And now let's read my original text. Quote, "The responsibility for the Franco-Russian conflict mostly lies on Alexander I." End quote. It is worth emphasizing that, in order to draw such a conclusion, I published a considerable amount of scientific articles and a whole monograph, while Sokolov only used already developed conception later. Of course, I don't want to call it plagiarism, and generally air dirty laundry of researchers who properly understand the essence of what occurred in that era. There are not many of us. But to remain silent about this problem would also be wrong. Nevertheless, it was my deeply conjugated idea that was used. Here, obviously, it is necessary to discuss Sokolov's character. The thing is, he is not only a historian, but also a reenactor. In his room there is even a portrait depicting him in the uniform of a divisional general of the First Empire, and among other reenactors, Sokolov is often referred to as Sire. Well, as a famous painter Pablo Ruiz Picasso once said, "Un artista copia, un gran artista roba." A good artist copies, a great artist steals. Apparently, the St. Petersburg associate professor and Sire is not deprived of true greatness. End quote. In the following paragraphs, Panasenkov also accused Sokolov of stealing his second main conception, which asserts the participation of the Russian Empire in continental blockade of England never had such a destructive effect on Russian economy as many historians tend to assume, and therefore could not justify the start of the war. When analyzing Panasenkov's accusations, many reasonably found them unjustified, as historical perspectives that he claimed to be solely his existed before both Sokolov and Panasenkov, while mentioned quotes didn't have identical wording, and their similarities could be easily explained by authors simply attempting to express similar thoughts that they came to. At the time, barely any readers paid much attention to Panasenkov's accusations, and it is safe to assume that the whole drama would be easily forgotten by most if Sokolov didn't find it necessary to come up with a response.
За подобные высказывания раньше, в общем-то, вызывали на дуэль. В общем, если вам хочется решить таким образом, пожалуйста, мы можем конным и пешим на шпаге и на сабле, нет никаких проблем. Вот.
On January 16th, 2018, a historical YouTube channel where Sokolov was a regular guest released a 2-hour video titled Oleg Sokolov about Yevgeny Panasenkov's book, The First Scientific History of the War of 1812. In it, among usual criticisms, Sokolov pointed out the inaccurateness of illustrations, the wrong number of troops, and unnecessary bragging about Panasenkov's personal artifact collection unrelated to the communicated information. He also expressed his doubts about Panasenkov actually seeing many historical documents that he mentioned as a source, and criticized the inappropriateness of the book's title by showing many high-quality works on a topic published throughout the years before supposed First Scientific History. Furthermore, he claimed that two specialists who were mentioned as reviewers of the monograph never actually saw it and were added without their knowledge or permission. Sokolov also tried to defend himself from plagiarism allegations by talking about historians and books that actually influenced his views and showing old French journals where his conceptions were outlined before any of Panasenkov's works. He concluded his review with the following, quote, "The writing in the book is pretty accessible. Maybe the guy had some talents, but those talents disappeared in a monstrous conceit and a desire to scandalize and show off. And the person who might have written good historical works wrote something that is impossible to accept." End quote. Despite typical Sokolov's emotionality, often reaching the verge of aggression, and the general harshness of the review, Sokolov and the host tried to maintain more or less discreet tone, at least when compared to the direct degrading manner of Panasenkov's response that was uploaded 2 weeks later under the title Yevgeny Panasenkov Destroys Liar and Thief Oleg Sokolov, a Historical Blockbuster.
На скотном дворе, пока барин отсутствовал, челядь и всякие маргиналы, завистники, они распоясались. Значит, есть такой истерический ролик Соколова по кличке Сир. Это, в общем, такой тип с физиономией спившегося водопроводчика.
Throughout 2.5-hour video, Panasenkov argued about the impossibility of Sokolov's unawareness of his conceptions and defended parts of the book that were criticized, of course, providing his arguments with excessive exercises in mocking. The constant sarcasm towards each other and a desire to establish one's dominance took their conflict out of bounds of purely academic discussion from the beginning. Panasenkov's response led to further deterioration of the discourse, propelling it for many YouTube viewers into the exciting realm of internet trolling.
Да, я сделал это первым. Да, это очень тяжело принять. Это вы действительно все мною поставлены в позу рака, и это не созвездие. Это не созвездие. И это надо принять. Это надо... Вы думаете, что я не понимаю вашего состояния? Я понимаю, я же поэтому так и назвал.
In the same video, Yevgeny jokingly tried to predict the fate of his current opponent.
Логически я никогда не ошибаюсь в прогнозах. Это зафиксировано, так сказать, это медицинский факт. Я никогда не ошибаюсь в прогнозах. Я полагаю, что я не буду тебя сажать в тюрьму, потому что, все-таки не хочу, чтобы даже ряженого французского генерала опускали советские петухи. Но в «Желтом доме», вот я боюсь, что финал будет именно такой.
But the deterioration of their conflict would not only manifest in a shift of tone, as Panasenkov's dedicated fans would quickly extend the confrontation beyond the internet.
Алло. Олег Валерьевич? Да. Добрый день. Вас беспокоит администрация.
Just before Panasenkov released his video, Oleg Sokolov started to receive a series of calls that would last for the beginning of February. The person on the phone introduced himself as Viktor Bondarenko, the head of the analytics department of the Russian presidential administration. He said that Panasenkov's political activity bothered the government for a long time, but they were afraid that any restrictive measures would only bring attention to his persona. For this reason, they were extremely happy to suddenly find an ally to contend with Panasenkov intellectually and wanted to express their gratitude for Sokolov's video with numerous rewards. The invitation to be moderator of the scientific roundtable under the president, and even inclusion in the list of presidential confidants. All Oleg would have to do in return was to deliver a propagandist speech that would praise the significance of Vladimir Putin's historical role and inspire people to go and vote for him on the upcoming 2018 presidential elections that will be held in March. The prospects seemed bright for Sokolov, so he continued back and forth conversation with Viktor for weeks, and only when the phone call would be leaked on the internet, Sokolov finally realized that the worker of the presidential administration that he was talking to this whole time was simply a pranker. Within his narrative about historians filled with a patriotic bias, Panasenkov often characterized Sokolov as a person extremely willing to suck up to governmental figures and people in power to benefit his status and career. So, the prank conducted by one of Panasenkov's supporters was aimed to reveal this specific quality. In one of the conversations, the caller asked Sokolov to characterize his boss, a dean of the history department of St. Petersburg State University, Abdullah Daudov. Sokolov said that scientific accomplishments of his boss are zero. He called his dissertation a pseudo-dissertation and stated that his supposed works are actually one work rewritten numerous times under different titles. But when it comes to Dean's quality as an official, his performance is absolutely outstanding. He's extremely loyal and ready to obey the will of his superiors without any hesitation. Then, their conversation evolved in an unexpected direction, which led to the incident that later became the main people's memory about the prank. Although Sokolov being addressed as professor was not uncommon, it never was his official title. Oleg Sokolov's specific academic rank is docent, which is equivalent to associate professor in other rank systems and resides just under the professor's status. The title of professor is obtained by defending a doctoral thesis, something that Sokolov never did. The low rank in his old age seemingly became a source of insecurities, though not to the point where he became willing to make an effort to legally obtain it. So at some point in the conversation, Sokolov started insistently asking the pranker, whom he perceived as an influential political figure, to use his power and connections to legally upgrade Sokolov's status from docent to professor. He justified such a request by saying, quote, "You see, I have a situation. I have 100 scientific works at the moment. At the time, I didn't issue the documents for my doctoral thesis, but the results of my research would have brought me tons of them. I could have easily defended it with my first monograph, but now they put so many obstacles, and it turned out that I have to take a ton of, so to speak, long formal moves. You see, if I obtain PhD, then my speech will sound much more convincing. Maybe it will look more valid if they sign me as doctor or professor and not docent, and I will be much more motivated and feel wanted." End quote. Viktor Bondarenko listened to Sokolov's request with full understanding and compassion, and even promised to promote his position in the university. In the next weeks, throughout the numerous calls and emails, Sokolov asked Viktor to hurry up with the promotion of his status, as it was becoming more urgent as the date of his non-existent propagandist performance approached. But then, Viktor stopped answering, and their conversations were leaked, revealing Sokolov's insecurities and embarrassing corruption to the internet audience. Yevgeny Panasenkov would later deny any personal participation in this prank, but would nevertheless express his appreciation for it, and later even give an interview to the person who conducted it. But this was only the first step in a slow ruining of Sokolov's reputation, as his interactions with Panasenkov's fans would only grow closer, eventually leading to a face-to-face confrontation on the 2nd of March. Panasenkov's supporters came to one of Sokolov's public lectures, and when he started taking questions from the audience, they took their phones to record their own question.
словаре не было найдено ни одной фактической ошибки. Ответ Евгения Николаевича Панасенкова последовал вскоре. И вы были увлечены во лжи и подлогах и в воровстве чужих концепций. После этого вы спокойно ведете лекцию при людях. Вы думаете, что никто...
Так, молодой человек, если вы пришли сюда для того, чтобы оскорбить, давайте отсюда. Вообще не хочу слушать, убирайтесь отсюда. Про вашу Панасенко, господа. Диванель, вы человек. Давай отсюда, садись. Давайте к вашему Панасенко, как подобно.
Дай ему в глаз.
Перестань. Так, нет, проводи,
Young men were forcefully and violently kicked out of the auditorium, and one of their phones was smashed. The ones who attacked them were a couple of Sokolov students, some of whom were often seen with him on reenactment events, so the soldier-like obedience to Sokolov's orders came as no surprise. The recorded video was uploaded on Panasenkov's channel the next day, and later he would create an English version to get Sokolov cancelled abroad, but the video never reached its target audience. As always, he denied any personal involvement, but appreciated the courage of a guy who confronted his enemy, and even invited him to a restaurant 20 days later, where he made a toast in his honor. From this point on, Panasenkov would start constantly advocating the necessity of Sokolov's dismissal from a university. Articles about the inappropriateness of Sokolov's actions started appearing, and, as the time went, the university received more and more complaints. But despite Ethical Commission of the university formally acknowledging his actions as unacceptable, he never received any major consequences. 5 days after the incident, on March 7th, Oleg Sokolov finally released his anticipated video response, in which he addressed the sudden turn of their conflict. Quote, "I know that most people who might even defend this subject were simply deceived, because I see that in order to draw a profit from lectures and other activities, some semblance of a cult has been created, whose leader stays somewhere behind the scenes, directing the actions of his henchmen. All methods are great when it comes to making a profit, and, obviously, as the people who went against the activity of this cult, we end up under a strike that, I want to emphasize, is absolutely unscientific." End quote. Sokolov never apologized to the beaten young man and presented himself as a victim of the situation, claiming that they threw horrible insults at him. He spent half of his video reading letters from specialists who support his opinions about the first scientific history, but most importantly, he announced that soon he would file a lawsuit against Panasenkov and asked viewers to help him obtain a good legal team by sending donations. Panasenkov's response did indeed long to be released, a week exactly.
«Петух в Шамбертене» — это автобиографическое. Шамбертен — это вино, чтобы вы понимали, это вино. Кто петух, в общем, тут есть написано даже Олег Соколов. Олег Соколов – генеральный эксперт. Ой, простите, а вот это что такое? Олежек, вот это что такое? Это ты генеральный эксперт, и вот это империя истории?
He as well dedicated most of the time to specialists that supported Sokolov, extensively dragging them through the mud and belittling their academic credentials. He also thanked Sokolov for helping his channel gain its first 100,000 subscribers, and encouraged him to release even more responses that would further promote the first scientific history. But despite this ironic encouragement, Sokolov would sink into prolonged silence, because on March 30th, he filed a lawsuit against Panasenkov for denigration of one's honor and dignity. Panasenkov in his turn filed a similar lawsuit against him, but in a different city, and so both of them were dragged into a legal battle that would last for years. To elude the accusations of insulting and slandering, Panasenkov and his lawyers applied numerous strategies, like denying the existence of his videos, denying his participation in the production and upload of them, and claiming that those videos were purposefully edited by someone to simply look like he is talking about Sokolov in them. Presumably, those specific strategies are at fault for the eventual deletion of the most of early content dedicated to Sokolov, and though he continued to be the main center of Panasenkov's attention, it was also redirected to criticize some of Sokolov's supporters. The first one was Oleg Sokolov's namesake, Alexander, or Sasha, Sokolov. He was a journalist and a science popularizer, mostly known for the creation of Anthropogenesis.ru, a website dedicated to the eponymous scientific sphere, and the creation of a forum called Scientists vs. Myths. Oleg was a popular lecturer on those forums and was positively regarded by Alexander. Another important figure tied to Anthropogenesis.ru was Leo Agronov, a historian and a school teacher who released an article criticizing the first scientific history on March 29th and who served as an expert on one of Anthropogenesis events, the annual RAL Award, a parody anti-award given for outstanding contribution to the development and dissemination of pseudoscience. The nominees for the award were first determined by suggestions from users on Anthropogenesis.ru website, and then the chosen ones were put up to poll, for which voting users determined the winner. But all the negative noise surrounding Panasenkov's persona, ending up in one of those polls was not unexpected for him. What was unexpected, however, were the consequences that eventually came from it. At first, Panasenkov was consistently keeping the second place, but at some point, other contenders started quickly surpassing him by suspiciously immediate leaps. The organizers quickly concluded that the poll was rigged by votes from bots. They also noticed that many comments from Panasenkov's defenders had extremely similar wording, and when moderators tried to communicate with such users, the last couldn't even precisely describe who Panasenkov or Sokolov were, as their comments were paid. A similar situation had been unraveled in review sections on websites for many internet bookstores, where people found a significant amount of allegedly paid positive reviews of the first scientific history. During this gradual discovery, website employees were able to partially eliminate bots from their polls, but the process of determining the winner kept being sabotaged, as both Anthropogenesis.ru and the website of the RAL Award crashed numerous times because of DDoS attacks. Prank calls also returned, though that time failed pretty quickly, as Alexander called to the TV studio, where, as a pranker assured, a live debate with Panasenkov should have taken place, only to find that the woman who called never worked there. But ironically, Alexander actually appeared on this TV channel later, but instead to talk about the consistent sabotage of his award ceremony. The staff of Anthropogenesis.ru assumed that those attacks were coordinated not just by enthusiastic Panasenkov's fans, but by Panasenkov himself. Those accusations, combined with constant criticisms towards the first scientific history, forced Yevgeny to release another video response, where he denied his personal participation in attacks and even assumed that they were made by Anthropogenesis.ru themselves as an excuse to silence his audience. Of course, all because of venomous envy that Alexander feels.
Итак, мимика, жест, рост, внешность, успех, все прочее. Ну и, конечно, знаменитые коллекции предметов искусства конца XVIII – начала XIX века. Это с одной стороны. С другой стороны, нечто обмякшее, небритое, такое по виду немытое, вечно в каком-то засаленном свитере.
This conflict cemented Panasenkov as the inevitable winner of the pseudoscientific award, which would be announced at the RAL ceremony on October 6th. But unfortunately for Alexander, he was unable to predict that Panasenkov's supporters would visit the ceremony. use a bicycle lock to attach a huge megaphone to the handrails, and soon the room would be filled with an evil laugh.
Не моющийся и убогий журналистик Саша Соколов обманул аудиторию. Из ущербной зависти к успешному ученому ты поставил книгу Панасенкова на голосование. Мошеннический канал.
Орден Петросяна первой степени.
The speech recorded by the unknown narrator contained the following, quote, "Not showering empathetic journalist Sasha Sokolov deceived the audience. Out of envy of a successful scientist, you poop Panasenka's book up for a vote. Fraudulently, with a horde of redneck goblins, you loaded up the votes and banned everyone who left positive reviews of Panasenka's work. And then Evgeny smeared you. In his video with documents in his hands, you cowardly fled and didn't take his challenge to debate. Instead, you dishonorably removed the thesis about the war role of Emperor Alexander and Kutuzov's depravity, which Panasenkov's easily proved. You tried to cover your namesake plagiarist Oleg Sokolov, who stole Panasenkov's conceptions. Sasha, you can't hide warts and cockroaches under your bristle, and you can't hide the plagiarism of your namesake behind your fraudulence. And a schoolboy Agronov, vilely slandering near the fountain, will forever remain ward on anthropogenesis. You lied and continue to lie, but now you have been obliterated publicly. So go and wipe loser Agronov's butt and change the diapers of plagiarist Oleg Sokolov." End quote. A wave of attacks on anthropogenesis mostly ceased with the closing of that year's ceremony. But the next year, Alexander and Leo would have to experience harassment from trolls again. In the summer of 2018, Leo Agronov announced his plans to release his second critical review of the first scientific history, which would surpass the size of the article from a previous year. The article was meant to be released on anthropogenesis.ru website. Soon after the announcement, when Agronov was on vacations in Bulgaria, he received an email letter that said, quote, "Stop yelping at Maestro, start storing growths and analgesic drugs, the firm gives you a chance." End quote. According to the threat of this anonymous user, if Agronov doesn't satisfy his demand, he will not be able to apply for any job in Russia. Soon after, Agronov's email got stolen, and screenshots of allegedly his letters got spread across Panasenkov's fan pages. Those screenshots contained descriptions of Leo's depression caused by his poverty and lack of self-realization, descriptions of constant humiliation that he experiences at his work as a school teacher, hatred and insults targeted towards students and their parents, numerous racist comments, search for a way to heal his anal fissure, and implications of his homosexual and pedophilic tendencies. The screenshots also revealed his real home address and conversation with Alexander, in which they discussed the payment for the future article, and where Alexander expressed his frustration with prank attacks. Quote, "You can't even imagine how hysterically furious I am from this public humiliation. Those bastards stepped all my weak spots, rubbed salt into all wounds. Absolutely everyone is laughing at me. Friends, colleagues, even my wife. I already managed to read Panasenkov's book, and I understand that this is a research of the highest level, and it would be really hard to seriously find fault with it. But it's okay. We will clinch to the most insignificant trifle, and be sly in some places. The internet audience will take everything at face value anyway, because uncritical thinking is prevalent when it comes to publications of large sizes, written scientifically sounding, and with references to large amounts of literature. Another thing that plays in our favor is that Panasenkov is also hated by many stupid patriots, they glad to be deceived themselves. The size, not less than 100 pages, will outweigh quality with quantity." End quote. The writing reminiscent of a cartoon villain monologue made many assume that the screenshots of supposed letters were fabricated and the guess was indeed confirmed by Leo and Alexander, who claimed that the screenshots of real ladders were altered or fabricated entirely. The implications of a grown-up's pedophilia, as well as other ugly details, were probably specifically created by Panasenkov's fans to get him fired from his job at school. Some existing web pages even showcased his home address, with calls to come there and violently punish Leo for his racism and deviations. The threats to his health also maintained an anonymous phone messages that he received prior. Quote, well, doormat, the whole internet, all forums, reenactment ones too, laugh at your ladders. Remember, now you're always in the crosshairs. If we don't like something you do, we'll make you famous on TV, and we'll send this whole information to your mom, dad, and your neighbors on a Skolkov highway. The time of arrival of your plane on the 23rd is known. You will get hit with a crowbar in a stairwell. Lay low and don't write, bitch. But before Alexander and Leo would have to face all the described harassment, Oleg Sokolov would receive it first, in comparable, if not greater, proportions. The most curious element of the feud between Sokolov and Panasenkov was just how much dark details about Sokolov's personality were gradually revealed to the wide audience throughout. Those facts paint a picture of a man whose inappropriate behaviors and outright crimes were never properly recognized or punished. Besides the incident at the 2007 annual Borodino battle, another thing that Panasenkov brought up in his videos was Sokolov's tendency to constantly date his students. This was widely known in a university, but the management never did anything to prevent it for almost 2 decades, and Sokolov's propensity to date younger women was something that could be easily observed throughout his whole life. As, at the age of 34, Oleg met his future ex-wife, 17-year-old Anastasia, who at the time was just graduating high school where Sokolov worked as a teacher. However, instances of Oleg bringing harm to those around him go back into an even deeper past. At the age of 24, Oleg Sokolov was a member of St. Petersburg Maritime History Club under the direction of Rudolf Bajogin. A major part of the club's activity was a reconstruction of ships aimed at stylizing them in the manner of old historical vessels that would later be used in reproduction of historical films. In 1981, the club participated in a production of a movie called Young Russia. 2 ships, St. Peter and St. George, should have been delivered from St. Petersburg to Primorsk, where the shooting took place. Unfortunately, the captain of St. George tremendously quarreled with the club's leader and left the team. With no people to replace him, Oleg Sokolov was chosen as a captain due to ship navigation courses he finished prior. However, his license never authorized him to legally operate a vehicle of such size, nor did it give him enough knowledge to do so, and so Sokolov, in cooperation with Bajogin, spent 2 or 3 months learning, but his knowledge remained poor. The ship he was assigned to steer was originally an old wooden trawler, bought by Bajogin in 1969, by his own admission, in a pretty poor state. Though the ship, that he decided to call Neva, was later improved and reconstructed to resemble the Santa Maria Caravel, the historical vessel used by Christopher Columbus on his first voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. Later, the Neva was reconstructed again, this time to replicate the 18th century frigate St. George, one of the ships that became the basis of the Russian Empire Navy. But the reconstruction process mostly concerned the visual design of the vessel, rather than nautical qualities. The bow of the ship was cut off, replaced, and decorated with a figurehead, which led to a reduction in water resistance. If waves were high enough, the hose, apertures for which an anchor cable passes easily let water flow into the chain locker, which in turn was really poorly sealed. Also, if waves were strong and high enough, then meant directly for the modern sharp bow, some water would flow to the deck, which was a problem, because initially solid hatches on the deck were replaced with a wooden lattice, for which water easily leaked. Existing implementation of water disposal was also ineffective. The first and last time the ship underwent technical inspection was 8 years prior, in 1973. In 1981, St. George remained in an unacceptable condition, but it didn't stop Pozhogin from using it, as the ship performed fine in ordinary circumstances where it was usually used. However, if met with extreme weather conditions, the chances of ship survival decreased drastically. Despite his rudimentary skills, Oleg Sokolov was absolutely emboldened by his captain role and the influence he exerted upon his crew. He expressed extreme pride in the way he strictly disciplined his new team, which, in his description, previously consisted of dirty and unorganized pirate lovers. The ones who didn't match his standards were simply kicked out. On the morning of July 4th, 2 ships left St. Petersburg's dock. St. Peter, with a crew of 11 people, including Captain Pozhogin, was leading. St. George, with a crew of 15 people, including Captain Sokolov, was following just behind it. In the morning, they reached Abrucha Fort and stayed there for the night. Unfortunately, the morning weather significantly worsened because of the strong wind. Both Pozhogin and Sokolov were dubious about leaving and decided to wait. But the movie producers pressured them to go, as each wasted day would cost studio money. Then, from the description of Rudolph, Sokolov proclaimed, quote, "What are we? Not sailors? We can conquer any storm." End quote. After being persuaded by the pressure of movie producers, Oleg's confidence in the seeming subsidence of wind, Pozhogin decided to go. But the further they went, the stronger wind became, and an hour later, when the ships were approximately 2 miles offshore, they got caught in a storm. Because the crew didn't use walkie-talkies or other communication devices, when St. Peter went a little ahead of St. George, Sokolov was left without communication with Pozhogin and was unable to receive any instructions. The course of the ships led them directly against the direction of wind, so high waves perpetually hit the bow St. George. First through the walls of overflow chain knocker, and later for the wooden lattice, water eventually flooded the inside orlop deck, and the bow started to lean over. The only correct actions in this situation would be to turn around, position the ship in a way where the waves were target more high and secure stern, and go back to the shore. But due to his appalling lack of experience, Sokolov continued moving forward, directly against the waves. The crew attempted to cover the wooden lattice with tarpaulin, but it was blown away by the wind. They also tried to remove water by using hand pump and buckets, but it proved to be ineffective. Growing desperate, they removed the weight from the bow by pushing off cannons into the water and attempted to chop down the mast. At the last moment, Sokolov realized the necessity of turning back, but it was already too late. The team ended up in the water and was soon picked up by St. Peter, but out of 15 members, only 14 came back. The scientist, Vladimir Sorokin, drowned, probably because he got tangled in fishing nets and went down with St. George. In his autobiography, Sokolov presents himself as a selfless hero in the situation. It is known that St. George towed an oared skiff bow behind itself, but from Oleg's description, people were afraid to cut the rope that attached it to the sinking ship due to their poor swimming skills. So, at the last moment, when the ship went underwater almost entirely and started to pull down the boat, Sokolov got to it, received an axe from one of crew members, and cut the rope. Then, he helped the survivors to get in a skiff, delivered them to St. Peter, saving their lives. However, Rudolf and his wife described those moments differently. From their words, the first thing that Sokolov did when the ship started sinking was to run and save his suitcase with antique candlesticks. Then, he jumped on a boat, left his crew behind, and went to St. Peter. While everyone was pulling survivors from the water and helping them change clothes, Oleg just stood aside, holding the suitcase with his antique candlesticks. Some crew members tried to beat him up, but were stopped by Pozhogin. Oleg immediately went away, and later Pozhogin's wife went down to his cabin, where, instead of Oleg, she witnessed a pair of pants smeared with feces laying on a bed. It's important to note that this consideration for Pozhogin's refusal to admit any fault of his own, potential grudge that he might hold against Oleg for drowning his ship, and generally poor recollection of circumstances behind the accident, his account remains similarly unreliable. Rudolf Pozhogin received 3 years of probation. He put most of the blame on Sokolov, who received 2 years of probation and put most of the blame on movie producers. Because this case wasn't covered by the news at the time, this part of Sokolov's biography mostly faded into obscurity and was brought back only in 2020. Another incident regarding his persona was brought up in an article of MK newspaper, published on May 23, 2018. On the day of the release, the article was linked on Panasenkov's Facebook page. Despite the severity of listed accusations, this publication was met by Sokolov with absolute silence, and 4 months later, Yevgeny would show the newspaper in one of his videos, revealing the story to a larger audience.
Кстати, вообще вот это, когда 64-летний старик, толстый, уродливый, и вот эти девочки, ищем девочку. Вот, пожалуйста, нашли девочку. Слушайте, боже, мы все нашли. Статья называется «Угрожал, что изуродует меня».
The article called "He Threatened to Disfigure Me" recounted the story of Sokolov's ex-girlfriend, Ekaterina. Back in 2008, she suddenly discovered that Oleg had been hiding the existence of his wife and children from her. She thought about leaving, but decided to give him a chance if he would promise to divorce his wife. Despite constant promises, Sokolov never did it, so eventually Ekaterina decided to finally break up. The rest of the story was described in her police report. Quote, "On November 29, 2008, I flew to Moscow to take my belongings from the apartment. Oleg Sokolov called me, and after learning about my intention to leave him, started insulting me. After that, I decided to stay at my friend's house and not to take back my things, but permanently leave them to Sokolov. In the evening of the same day, I received a call from him. In a calm and friendly voice, he proposed to meet and promised to help me pick up my things and escort me to an airport. Convinced by his tone that I was not in danger, I went to his house around 8 or 9 p.m. Sokolov was waiting near the entrance, absolutely calm. He helped me get out of the car, and we took an elevator up to his apartment. When they entered the apartment, he locked the door and started helping to take off my fur coat. While doing that, Sokolov grabbed my arms from behind and tied them with a rope, which, as I understood, he prepared beforehand. I started to resist and asked him what's happening, but Sokolov punched me in the face and stomach, and after that, tied my arms and legs to the chair. I found myself absolutely helpless and unable to fight back. Sokolov went into the next room, while I stayed tied to the chair in the lobby. He came back with an iron and plugged it in front of my eyes. When the iron got hot, he brought it to my face so close that I could feel the heat coming from it, and threatened that he will disfigure me for life. After that, he started methodically hitting me in the face, the head, punching me in the chest and stomach. After all my pleading for him to stop and come to senses, he only beat me harder and threatened that he will kill me and bury my corpse on the nearest construction site, where I will never be found. In an hour or more, Sokolov beat me up in a way that was described above and lifted me by the hair and ears along with the chair. At some point, I was able to free my legs and rushed into the next room, but Sokolov followed me and knocked me to the ground. When I fell on my stomach, he started kicking the chair I was tied to. Then, Sokolov wrapped a leather cord around my neck and started to strangle me. When I started to suffocate and lose consciousness, Sokolov finally let me go. I presume that Oleg Sokolov committed an attempt at premeditated murder. The rope prepared in advance, the chosen place for beating, the lobby was noise isolation. All this indicates that Sokolov was not in a state of affect." End quote. Apparently because of police ineffectiveness, the case was never properly investigated, and in a desire to escape the situation as soon as possible, Ekaterina gave up on it. The same newspaper also contacted Ekaterina herself. Quote, "Our newspaper also managed to contact the victim. The girl, while barely holding back tears, told to a reporter, 'I was a student back then, a child almost, without any connections or money, while he had Baturin as his friend and other influential people. I simply had no energy or opportunities to push the case forward. You can't imagine what hell I lived through, can't wish it on my worst enemy. Today, it is really painful to recall.' Such things do not require any comments. From our side, we only wish for one thing, that such nightmare would never repeat with anyone ever again. As the saying goes, warned means protected." The article about Ekaterina was released on May 23rd, around the time the civil trial between Sokolov and Panasenkov started. 5 days prior, information about the upcoming release of the police report was used in anonymous SMS threats as a way to blackmail Oleg into creating an apology video where he would confess to accidental plagiarism of Panasenkov's conceptions. In the face of the threats, he contacted Ekaterina via email and asked to take back her police report so he could say that the whole thing was fabricated. She herself wanted to leave the story behind, but was unable to take anything back because she was living in another country. By the end of the spring of 2018, the harassment that he received from Panasenkov's fans significantly increased, which mostly could be attributed to the start of their legal battles. 2 times throughout the summer, the stairwell of Oleg's house was vandalized, with insulting messages written on walls. A couple of times, people tried to hack emails of Sokolov and others close to him. He also started to receive more anonymous SMS threats. Quote, "Soon the whole country will see poor girls and bald abdominous old clown. You were slickly put under Evgeny's bulldozer, and you will remember me, the one who you wronged a couple years ago. Wait for new surprises. Don't leave the house. You have 36 hours, sweetie, to find a mini camera in your, as it turns out, beggarly apartment. A Soviet wall, an old TV, a red Soviet carpet near white doors. What a shame. Even the bust is empty. You're so untidy. The game is on. Prepare to be a TV star. Our Evgeny will love it." And a court appeal. Not you will be screwed, but your remains. The Neva River is cold now. End quote. As always, Panasenkov denied that he took part in any of those attacks, while Sokolov was completely convinced that they were not only organized by Panasenkov, but partially done by his hands. For example, he claimed that once Panasenkov personally sneaked into his apartment building and put insulting and accusatory flyers targeted against him into the mailboxes of his neighbors. Regardless of the veracity of those statements, it is pretty fair to assume that Panasenkov at least teased Sokolov by bolstering such ideas. At the end of spring, he uploaded a 2-minute video where he walks near Oleg's house while snarkishly pointing out that restaurants named Idiot and Hayloft are both sited in the same building. The video ends with him suspiciously walking out from the entrance to Sokolov's house. On September 26, he released a video message to the dean of the history department of St. Petersburg State University, Abdullah Daudov with a request to fire Oleg Sokolov. Quote, "As a citizen, as a taxpayer, and as a historian, I am no longer asking, I'm demanding to immediately fire Oleg Sokolov because all that I described is incompatible with the ability to teach youth. Abdullah Daudov, I'm very curious. How can you shake this person's hand? How can you laud him to the students? After all, you have self-respect, you have conscience. If you don't believe the girl's statement, go to court, go to the newspaper, verify it. But to ignore it, sit it out, it's vile, it's dishonorable, it's disgusting. I mean, all students and parents read this. What do you even want? Do you want all parents to know the ages of Isabel, Ekaterina, Anastasia? Do you want battered Ekaterina to come to your office? Because I can arrange it for you. Would it be enough for you then? Abdullah Daudov, I ask you to record a video response as soon as possible, because I don't need paper replies that officials usually do. I want to see your eyes. I want everyone to see your eyes. I think you can come down to answer me personally. After all, I, the author of fundamental studies and a researcher with an international name, came down to record a very detailed appeal to you. An interesting thing is that all those incidents did not happen in one day. It all was already known. And if he wasn't fired still, some people might ask why he was never fired. Maybe someone is covering him up? Maybe there are reasons to cover him up. I really don't want people to start asking those maybe unfair questions. So I'm asking to fire Oleg Sokolov and record a video response to me. Abdullah Daudov, I perfectly understand that now you're obviously deciding, tactically and psychologically, who will bring you more emotions, me or Sokolov. But I need to remark that even considering Oleg's phenomenal psychological health, I can assure you that on my way to justice and truth, I will bring much more emotions." End quote. Despite Panasenkov's demands, and the demands of people who bombarded the university with complaint letters, the situation was completely ignored. In 2019, the release of the content surrounding their feud stopped almost entirely, as their conflict fully moved into the courtrooms. They participated in 2 trials, one in Moscow, where Sokolov was a plaintiff and Panasenkov was a defendant, and one in St. Petersburg, where the roles were reversed. The Moscow trial, at least at the time, was won by Sokolov, while the St. Petersburg trial was won by Panasenkov. None of the trials directly regarded plagiarism allegations, as both of them were examining charges of denigration of one's honor and dignity, and mostly focused on slandering and insults that both threw at each other. Despite that, both rivals preferred to say that the trial that they specifically won was the one that dug into plagiarism question the most, and the fact that the charges were never about that was only brought up when talking about the trial won by their opponent as a way to diminish its importance. Though, allegedly, when Panasenkov's accusations of plagiarism were touched upon, they were not found legitimate. On November 1st, 2019, Sokolov released a video in which he addresses the harassment that he and his supporters, like Leo Agronov, received in the last 1.5 years.
И довольно много плохих людей видел, но подобного я вообще не знал, что такое существует. Вы знаете, в течение более 1,5 лет происходило какое-то постоянное... Во-первых, мне постоянно приходили угрозы. На мой номер телефона. Мне приходили угрозы о том, что мое тело будет лежать в Венеме еще до апелляции. Вода там сейчас холодная. Мне грозили убийством, расправой. Подонки и негодяи. Это были подонки и негодяи. Расписывали мои парадные оскорбительными всякими вещами. Дальше сам Панасенков приходил в эту парадную, засовывал в почтовые ящики моих соседей оскорбительные листовки против меня. Они пытались взломать мою почту. Они взломали почту близких мне людей. Это просто, это настоящая банда. Это то, что творилось в эти 1,5 года.
But mostly, he talked about his perspective on the outcome of the trials.
Я должен выплатить ему 10 000 рублей А он, соответственно, мне перед этим должен выплатить 175 тысяч рублей. Соответственно, можно сказать, что суд в Петербурге, господин Панасенко, он объявил о том, что он триумфально выиграл суд. Триумфально. Триумф его заключается в том, что он мне заплатит не 175 тысяч рублей, а 165 тысяч. Это такое жалкое, наивный лепет победа. Сегодня я триумфально выиграл суд у печально известного питерского доцента Олега Соколова и так далее, и так далее. Я блистательный, восхитительный, потрясающий. И жалкие эти людишки.
The outcome of the Moscow trial was perceived by Sokolov as an indication of his final victory, but this celebration would be pretty short-lived, as the next year, after an appeal of the decision, the Moscow court would also end up siding with Panasenkov. The reason for this sudden change probably lies in the fact that exactly a week after the upload of this video, Sokolov did something so unforgivable that it would forever change the perception of him for the whole Russian society. A widespread understanding around Oleg's choice of romantic partners is that he preferred women whose appearance most closely resembled that of Josephine, Napoleon Bonaparte's wife, though in glancing at the history of his romantic life, that would appear as one of the more superficial observations. The extent to which Sokolov was demanding when it came to relationship with his partners suggests that the concept of unconditional love was absolutely alien to him. Helping with his work and indulging his historical and reenactment interests was an absolute necessity, and his love lasted as long as a person was solely dedicated to entertaining him by participating in his lifestyle. Because Sokolov felt the need to be the only center of his lover's attention, then losing dedication to his interest was perceived by Oleg as justifications for betraying them and moving to the next partner that could satisfy this need. This pattern repeated throughout all of Sokolov's relationships. He entered a relationship with his first wife, Olga, when she was 2 years away from finishing high school. When he was 23, Olga turned 18, and they immediately got married. Because of their lack of sexual education, Olga unexpectedly got pregnant soon after their wedding, and a couple days after the St. George incident, their daughter Anna was born. Sokolov was entirely uninterested in his daughter, while Olga wanted to have a quiet family lifestyle that poorly corresponded with constant drunken parties held by Sokolov in their house. In addition to that, Olga's interest and knowledge lied in the field of German literature, which made her unable to indulge in Sokolov's love for French history. The lack of support from his wife became a justification for the start of perpetual cheating, which lasted until Olga herself found a new man, flew with her daughter to Germany, and filed for divorce. At the age of 34, he started a relationship with 17-year-old Anastasia, who he met at school where he was working as a teacher. Anastasia turned out to be much more dedicated to Oleg's interests when compared to his ex-wife. Just for him, she dropped her medical degree, and following his recommendations, entered the art history department, where she chose the art of the Napoleonic period as her main subject. She started learning French to help Sokolov with technical work for his historical books. She was even able to forgive him for occasional flirting with other women during parties in their house. But Anastasia's dedication and loyalty shown throughout the years didn't save her from eventual cheating. In his autobiography, Sokolov describes his choosing of romantic partners and justifications for betraying them in a manner a boss would describe changing his employees. Quote, "As I already said, my wife Nastya was simply ideal, beautiful, faithful, cheerful, and reliable assistant in all matters. For instance, processing of gigantic array of documents for my book Napoleon's Army would be impossible without her. We examined about 10,000 soldier cases alone. But the child's birth completely changed the character of Nastya. No, she didn't get worse at all. It's just that for her, the whole system of values has changed. The main and only thing in her life was this little precious ball of life, a little girl that became the center of the universe for her. She entirely immersed herself into motherhood, and could no longer provide me with any help in my affairs, while they, as before, put pressure on me, leaving no time to breathe. Moreover, even before that, my faithful assistant in all the administrative and staff affairs of the association stopped his work, and I was left virtually without any administrative and technical assistance. But apparently, nature doesn't know a blank space, and almost at the same moment, a young beautiful girl, Anna, appeared next to me. She wasn't a naive little girl, she was 20 years old. She was a student in the Institute of Culture, but she was so inflamed by the desire to be with me that in the first evening when she came to visit me, Anna immediately became close to me without the slightest hesitation or doubt. But just as quickly, she became a true devoted friend, and not just a friend, but the closest ally who took upon herself assistance in all affairs. She became both a secretary and a clerk. She processed all the official papers, of which there was a great mass, because I had 2 functioning associations in parallel. Soon, in addition to all this, she had to become an accountant of the association, with all the ensuing consequences, in the form of a bunch of all sorts of administrative papers, in which I didn't understand anything at all. Finally, Anna had excellent computer skills, and, if necessary, could draw any battle plan or economic diagram with computer graphics. At the same time, she was affectionate, gentle, cheerful, and simply ideal in love. But among other things, we were united by a common system of values." End quote. Sokolov assumed that Anastasia would easily endure and forgive his cheating, so when she became completely crushed by his actions and immediately ended their relationship, he was pretty surprised, but was able to easily move on. He met 20-year-old Anna when he was 41. Their relationship became the most long-lasting, as Anna was the most dedicated to Sokolov's interests and lifestyle. They had 2 daughters, and as always, their birth only led to deterioration of their relationship. Because of Sokolov's never-stopping cheating tendencies, they became more and more distant and were living separately by 2014. However, they were able to remain friends, and while his daughters were living with their mom, he continued participating in their lives more or less actively. It's during this marriage when he started dating Ekaterina, whose story remains the only one told not by Sokolov but by woman herself. Her story extends beyond what was described in her police report, though none of this information was publicly known until the fall of 2020. According to her statements, their relationship started in the summer of 2007 when she was 21. It became clear very quickly that maintaining the relationship required a mitigated focus on Oleg's desires. His polite requests quickly became demands, which concerned what she allowed to wear, where she allowed to go, and who she allowed to talk to. He considered her close friends a bad influence and pushed her to stop talking with them. Because he wanted to keep their affairs secret, he also pushed her to lie to her parents, which significantly damaged their trust. As a result, she became isolated. The first time she witnessed Sokolov's short-tempered nature was when he flew into a tantrum over a 5-minute lateness of his reenactment subordinate. But their own big fight transpired when she brought home her university homework. A French teacher gave her a text to translate, an article from the French magazine about homosexuality. Oleg became completely outraged upon reading the article and suggested that her French teacher probably molests her, but Ekaterina refused such wild assumptions. She thought that was the end of it, but a couple days later, Sokolov anonymously called the university administration, pretending to speak on behalf of her dad, and accused the French teacher of sexually harassing his female students. The university thought that the false accusations were created by Ekaterina and her friend, which almost led to her being expelled and forever ruined her relationship with university staff. When she asked why Oleg did this, he said he was just joking. Because Sokolov was hiding the existence of his wife and children from her and never satisfied his promises to divorce his wife, Ekaterina decided to leave him, which resulted in the assault on November 28, 2008, and the ensuing police report. But according to Ekaterina's words, the real hell started after this. She flew from Moscow to St. Petersburg, and Sokolov started persistently calling her, begging to take back the police report, and was eventually blocked. Unable to hide her injuries, Ekaterina told what happened to her mom, who started to accompany her daughter wherever she went, because Ekaterina suspected that Sokolov might start stalking her. And indeed, one day Sokolov suddenly met them and invited her mother to a restaurant, where he started crying and claiming that Ekaterina led him to a nervous breakdown. Since then, he started calling her mother almost every single day and spent hours sharing the most intimate details of their romantic life. Because Ekaterina's relationship with her family was previously spoiled by lies meant to hide her relationship with Oleg, he was able to manipulate her mother to take his side. With time, finding a resolution to this situation felt more and more necessary, because it served as a constant distraction for her main goal, to write a thesis and finish her education. Because of this, she called and asked Oleg to finally end everything between them. Sokolov agreed, on a condition that she would fly to Moscow and they spend the last evening together. Ekaterina foolishly agreed, but when their meeting in Moscow ended, Sokolov wasn't willing to let her go. He fell on his knees, tightly grabbed her clothes, and begged her to stay, until Ekaterina ran away. A couple days later, he called her and said that he recorded some kind of video. Ekaterina stated she never saw the supposedly existing video and doesn't have any clue what it could potentially contain. Nevertheless, Sokolov threatened that if she ever spoke out against him, he would send this compromising recording to the university, to her parents, to every single man that she would ever date, and that it would be a gift for her wedding. In January, Sokolov had a heart attack and accused Ekaterina of causing it. She started visiting the hospital and helped him recover. Throughout the next year, they sometimes talked on the phone, though those conversations mostly consisted of arguing. Ekaterina states that she was able to eventually forgive Sokolov for what he had done, and even considered him a friend. Throughout the years, they met in different European cities at least 3 times. In 2014, she even flew to Spain to help Sokolov with work on his novel, The Mystery of the Templars, which was meant to be dedicated to the story of their love. Since then, Sokolov moved on to other women. The group who he dated particularly often were students of the university he worked at. From description of students, Sokolov usually invited girls to his apartment where they discussed their studies in history. At some point, he proposed to accompany him on an upcoming reenactment ball that was never directly said, implied engaging in romantic connection. According to some reenactors, throughout the early 2010s, Sokolov appeared in reenactment events with often changing partners, but in 2014, he met a girl that was able to suddenly stop this continuous alteration. When that girl was seen by Ekaterina, she reminded her a mirror reflection of herself. Her clothes, reminiscent of Sokolov's taste, her looks, even her psychological type, felt similar. Ekaterina thought about contacting her on Facebook to warn about Oleg's dangerousness, but came to the conclusion that she will not be believed and decided not to intervene. On April 26, 1995, the Yashchenko household saw an addition to their family, a girl whose birth was accompanied by health complications in the form of hemangioma, a benign tumor of blood vessels. Parents decided to call their daughter Anastasia, which means resurrected. The tumor was located on her nose, which later she would call the cause of all of her misfortunes, as it took numerous years and operations to fully remove the defect, while Anastasia received vile bullying from other kids. This childhood experience left Anastasia with a mark, a tiny scar on her nose, barely visible to most, but unavoidable to Anastasia's mind. Throughout her life, she was always observed by studying and reading, and preferred it to partying with peers. Growing up in a family of workaholics, she naturally developed a habit of spending every minute usefully. She attended art classes, participated in every school contest, and maintained a perfect academic score both for school and college. Her refined disposition made her friends joke that she was born in a wrong era, but at the same time, she was pretty blunt when it came to voicing her opinions. People around often pointed out her outstanding memory, intellect, and beauty, but she disagreed with such compliments. Her particular love for history was already formed at school, so after graduating in 2012, she left her small town and enrolled in the history department of St. Petersburg State University. The initial focus of her research was the early 20th century Russian Civil War, but on the third year of her education program, this focus suddenly turned to the studies of the Napoleonic Wars. All because around that time, she started visiting lectures by popular professor Oleg Sokolov. He noticed Anastasia Yashchenko, and after a short pursuit, initiated the start of their relationship. At that time, Anastasia was 19, while he was 58. One day she admitted to Oleg that she doesn't like her name, so he started calling her Isabelle Duchesse de Luxe, the same French nickname that he tried to give to Ekaterina in the past, while Anastasia would usually call him Sire. This was her first ever relationship, and that fresh feeling of first mutual love was only amplified by their shared love for history. After graduating and entering a postgraduate course, she regularly assisted Oleg in his lectures and co-wrote numerous articles with him. They constantly visited European cities of their historical interest, mostly for collaborative archival work. Expectedly, Anastasia became an eminent companion of Sokolov on reenactment events, where she often acted as a photographer or as a help in the kitchen. However, to participate in the newly introduced lifestyle of her lover, even an individual as hardworking as Anastasia would have to make personal sacrifices. She dropped her main interest, the research of the Russian Civil War, and left the theater class that she attended for 3 years. In 2017, she shared in a conversation with her friend that because of Oleg, she stopped feeling like herself. But her love didn't get weaker yet. The pair was planning to eventually get married, so in 2018, Sokolov finally divorced his wife. The same year, his conflict with Panasenkov started, in which Anastasia showed extreme loyalty to her future husband. After the incident with kicked-out young man at Sokolov's lecture, she wrote a defense letter to the university administration with supplementary critical letters on Panasenkov written by other historians. Her close association with Oleg also somewhat made her a target of harassment by Panasenkov's followers who stole her social media account. For many years, Sokolov forced Anastasia to hide the existence of their relationship from her family, which was still living in her hometown, Starovelichkovskaya, on the other side of the country. Eventually, Anastasia revealed truth to her mom, who, with consideration for Sokolov's old age, tried to change her daughter's mind, but to no effect. Even then, the exact details or any problems in their relationship often remained unspoken. Their appearances at reenactment balls were painting almost a fairy tale-like picture to the outside world, a recording that later would be the most frequently used all across national news, captures their visit to the reenacted Erfurt Ball. The footage shows how Oleg restricts Anastasia from taking a glass of champagne and forces her to take one with an insignificantly smaller amount of drink. She obeys with apparent annoyance. Throughout the evening, Sokolov talks with the guests, while Anastasia boringly stands aside, rarely engages in conversations, and desperately tries to get the last drops from prematurely emptied glass. Though the precise intricacies of their relationship remain uncertain, it is known that in 2019, their love started to spoil. It manifested in the harsh insults that Anastasia threw towards Sokolov's daughters and wife, which severely enraged him. The probable primary reason for her contempt were suspicions that Oleg used constant visits to his children as a pretext to secretly cheat on her with his ex-wife. Despite those reigniting quarrels, both still hung on to their dream of getting married for months, but because the tension continued escalating, this dream never came to be. On November 6th, Anastasia visited the Moscow Historical Archives and came back to St. Petersburg on November 7th. At the train station, she was met by Sokolov. They came to his apartment around 10 p.m. and soon, a fight between them transpired. According to Sokolov, Anastasia became suddenly and intensely aggressive because Sokolov mentioned his plans to visit his children, but according to Anastasia's brother, who spoke with her that night, their argument actually started because Oleg was dissatisfied with Anastasia's plans to visit a birthday party of her friend the next day. A woman living in an adjacent apartment would later claim that she partially heard their argument through the wall. By her recollection, Sokolov said that Anastasia will not go anywhere. They started insulting each other, and Oleg lamented how ungrateful she is despite him picking her up from a train station. Then, Anastasia asked not to touch her, and after that, the neighbor heard the sounds of moving furniture, a couple of hits on the floor and walls, and woman screams. After some continuation of the quarreling, Sokolov took his phone and recorded the following video.
Вижу тебя, уйди с дороги, отпусти меня.
Не уйду с дороги.
Уйди, я тебя не люблю больше.
Я понял. Я это понял.
Да что ты меня бьешь? Кто тебе дал право меня бить? Кто? Ты мой телефон также швырнул, придурок, еще сильнее швырнул. Ты мне его покупал, ты мне еще не купил нормально.
Anastasia ran out into the cold street wearing only slippers and called her brother. She said that she was planning to go to her friend's birthday party, to which Sokolov reacted aggressively, beat her up, and slammed her head against the floor. Brother asked if it was the first time Oleg had been violent towards her. She said it wasn't the first. Brother suggested not to go back and spend the night somewhere else, but she couldn't, because all of her belongings, including her documents, remained in the apartment. When the brother called back 40 minutes later, Anastasia had already came back and said that their fight was over and they had made peace. In the background of the call, Sokolov asked who she's talking to which she responded that she is talking to her brother, and if he doesn't believe her, he can check. She and her brother agreed that they would talk in the morning, but Anastasia would never answer his calls. The neighbor, who was now hearing a peaceful conversation through the wall, went to sleep. Anastasia started preparing to go to sleep also, while Sokolov used his computer to check his email, search YouTube, and explore the neighborhood surrounding their house through Google Maps. Then, between 2:30 and 3 a.m., when Anastasia was laying on the bed, Sokolov walked into her bedroom and shot her in the head. Anastasia managed to survive, so Sokolov started to strangle her, breaking the bones in her neck. After she continued showing the signs of life, Sokolov made 3 additional shots in her head, and Anastasia died. The weapon that he used was an illegally kept, sewn-off small-caliber rifle. stylized as 19th century French cavalry pistol. Such weapon makes it impossible to fire multiple shots at once in a quick succession, which means that Sokolov had to take time and effort to manually recharge the weapon after each and every single shot. Sokolov would later claim that at this moment he wanted to end his life. The particular way in which he wanted to do it was to prepare a will for his children, dress in his uniform of a French divisional general, grab a gun, go to the Peter and Paul Fortress, a popular tourist location, and end his life in front of the crowd. But despite the supposed plans, the first thing that Sokolov did in the morning was to casually schedule a repair of his gas water heater. A repairman meant to appear 3 days later. He also called the French embassy to check if they received his letter, in which he discusses the future plans of his reenactment organization. Around that time, he would also hide Anastasia's body under the bed, clean the bedroom, and call Anastasia's cell phone multiple times while answering the calls himself, potentially to claim later that at that time they talked and Anastasia was alive. Throughout the day, he visited different shops where he bought a new mattress, plastic bags, a saw, and groceries for the guests he previously scheduled to welcome that evening. A couple of friends went to his house around 8 p.m. and the following photo was taken. For 2 hours, the company was eating red caviar, drinking French brandy, and happily discussing history. During the party, Sokolov acted so calmly and authentically that friends weren't able to notice anything wrong, even less so suspect that Anastasia's dead body was hidden under the bed just behind the door. When everybody left around 10 p.m., Sokolov drank some vodka to brace himself for what he was about to do. He dragged Anastasia's body into the bathroom and using a saw separated her body into parts, which he packaged in 4 individual plastic bags. After examining the neighborhood through Google Maps, he developed a plan for how to dispose of them. In the middle of the night, he threw the bags out the window, picked them up, and carried them to the nearby Moika River, one by one. The place where he tried to drown them was located right in front of his apartment building, 100 meters from the Federal Investigative Committee, and right in the sight of surveillance cameras. While the first 2 packages with legs and torso were able to successfully drown, the arms suddenly floated to the surface. Sokolov panicked and decided to jump into the canal to obtain the package. After floundering in a cold stream for some time, he managed to catch up to the arms and hid them in the backpack. He swam to the edge of the river and clinged to the stone platform connected to the ladder that granted an escape from the canal. The only thing left for Oleg was to lift himself a step or at least roll onto the platform and use the ladder to climb back to the street. But the time spent in the cold water was enough for him to reach a hypothermic state, and Sokolov, who was now unable to get out, suddenly realized that he had become the one on the edge of death. He screamed and desperately called for help, until he was heard by a passing taxi driver, who, unable to pull out Oleg himself, called emergency services. The rescue team appeared 2 minutes later. When Sokolov was pulled out from the water, he fell to the ground, trying to protect the backpack with his own body, and refused to go anywhere. He continued shouting incoherent nonsense, and medical workers transported him into the ambulance car. While examining him, one of the doctors found a gun hidden in his pocket. They called the police officer, who was already planning to leave, thinking the case was just a drunk accident. and he assured them that it was just a traumatic gun, nothing necessarily illegal, though he still wanted to find out more about this armed individual. He opened Oleg's backpack in an attempt to find his passport, but had to make a much more dreadful discovery. After bringing Sokolov to a hospital where he regained consciousness, everyone was perplexed by the news that their potential criminal was a famous university professor. His first explanation of events, that in the upcoming year would go through numerous changes, was that after drinking with friends he was walking down the street and suddenly saw a backpack floating in the river, and because he was drunk, he decided to jump into the canal to save this unknown object. But the police didn't believe this explanation, as by that time, they had already found bloody tools in a package with the woman's head lying in his apartment. After the medical recovery, Sokolov was arrested. In the next few days, the diving team would spend hours upon hours in a search of the remaining packages, and with them, they would also unexpectedly find a skeleton of the unknown person. It almost forced the police to open an additional criminal case, but experts concluded that divers simply found a classroom skeleton, probably thrown into the river by the medical students from the university nearby. Anastasia's funeral was conducted on November 16th in her hometown, Starovelichkovskaya. A huge crowd, fueled by sorrow and anger, gathered to say their final goodbyes. Anastasia's mother collapsed weeping at her daughter's coffin and had to be hospitalized before the end of the ceremony. Very quickly, the national news would be saturated with endless articles bringing all the scandals and dark stories from Sokolov's past that people retrospectively saw as overlooked warning signs. And unsurprisingly, those articles were unable to not touch upon the conflict with Sokolov's greatest enemy, who supposedly tried to reveal Oleg's true nature for the last 2 years. Some internet users started waiting for Panasenkov's comments in reaction to this horrific tragedy, and soon this reaction was released.
Знаешь, что он сделает? Ну. Еще в эфир тебя попадешь.
Коллеги, я считаю детектив. Больше до конца вообще никто не дойдет.
Это рядом с новостью об аресте Соколова, да? Не, предъявление обвинения Соколова. Да.
Спал всю ночь.
Though Panasenkov's victory dance upon the news about the murder of the innocent girl wasn't the first video that viewers saw, and the earliest upload had a much more serious tone, but the message hidden behind it appeared similarly perplexing. In the video he describes the gruesome way in which Sokolov committed the murder, while commenting, quote, "What less could be expected from a person who so boorishly criticizes my monograph?" End quote. Besides this promotional insert, Yevgeny strongly emphasized that Sokolov serves as an exemplary portrait of all Panasenkov's enviers, and that anybody who dares to go against Yevgeny will inevitably meet a similar fate.
Вот, кстати говоря, портрет, прекрасный портрет моего завистника и ненавистника. Прекрасный портрет человека, который критикует мои исследования исторические. Прекрасный портрет человека, который критикует первую научную историю войны 1812 года. Расчленил девочку.
And though their ongoing plagiarism feud continued to be the main focus every time Panasenkov spoke about the terrible event, he would also try to serve justice to those who defended Sokolov and ignored his inappropriate behaviors this whole time, especially the administration of St. Petersburg State University, and particularly the dean of the history department, Abdullah Daudov, to whom Panasenkov appealed personally in the past. In one interview, Daudov shared his first reaction to the news. Quote, "Sokolov is an excellent teacher, a good researcher, a historian. Students loved him. He's a Chevalier of the National Order of the Legion of Honor, France's highest reward. Sokolov is an honored man. This is why we were shocked. How could this happen? We talked just the other day. Sokolov was resilient, with a kind smile. This is an absolute surprise. The investigation should figure this out. Maybe it wasn't Sokolov. Maybe he's also a victim. Let's wait till the end of the investigation." End quote. When reporters confronted him about why Sokolov was never fired, despite endless complaints the university received, Daudov deflected any responsibility and answered that firing Sokolov or influencing him in any way resided beyond his authority, and implied that the only subject who had authority to fire Sokolov from the university for the last 2 years was criminal court, which was nonsensical. When journalists asked him if he was aware of Sokolov's intimate relationship with Anastasia and why he allowed it, Daudov responded, quote, "If you call a relationship between a husband and wife living in a de facto marriage an intimate relationship, then we all live in an intimate relationship. So everything that happened has more to do with family relationship than our university. Neither my functions nor functions of other teachers imply looking after intimate lives of our colleagues. This is their adult business. How can you even imagine that? I will start reading ethics and morals to each and every teacher. Where are we in the kindergarten? They are accomplished personalities. This is not regular people. This is an elite of our university." End quote. When Daudov would appear in a court as a witness from the side of the defense, he would emphasize that Anastasia's murder should only be called tragedy, the term that Sokolov preferred to use to describe what he has done. He would characterize Sokolov purely positively, mostly bringing up his numerous academic accomplishments. And after the end of his testimony, Sokolov would call Daudov a real man and thank him for kind and warm words said at a difficult minute. Despite massive public outrage around Daudov's words and actions, he and other administration staff kept the university positions. Panasenkov not only desperately tried to fire the university administration and bring punishment to Sokolov's friends who continued to minimize his guilt, but he also brought his own support and media attention to the lawyer of Anastasia's family. However, the support not always came in the most appropriate manner.
И еще один по поводу его мистического адвоката, который, кстати, невероятно внешне, как мне представляется, похож на Брейвика. Только Брейвик гораздо более обаятелен. Вот, значит, вообще подобное тянется к подобному. Посмотрите, вот меня извините, да, но я физиономист, посмотрите на нас, посмотрите на Сира с Брейвиком. Вот все.
A considerable number of Panasenkov's videos started featuring Oleg in one way or another, and usually they were not left without the promotion of the first scientific history. In one of the videos, he visits the place where Sokolov was pulled from the river.
Вот здесь это было, да? Так, и что же? И вот это вот, значит, мудак не смог выбраться, да? Мне кажется, что Олега подвел прежде всего низкий интеллектуальный уровень. Потому что до такой степени все делать неправильно. Если бы он ее хранил в холодильнике, например, и постоянно, по чуть-чуть, медленно скармливал своим алкашам, значит, собутыльникам, уже большая армия этих идиотов, да? Вот, то, ну, кто бы хватился? Ну, вот почти этот фантик, это вот как бы метафора Олега. Вот этот вот фантик.
During that time, the rise of Panasenkov's fame would reach its peak, as he used countless media platforms to talk about how he tried to save Anastasia's life, but no one ever listened to him. And though he openly exploited the situation as a means of self-promotion, his endless streak of interviews and talk show appearances would soon prove unnecessary, as no one would bring as much attention to his persona as Sokolov and his defense team. In essence, even in the face of the most horrific circumstances, which in theory should have overshadowed their old concerns about each other, their historical feud simply continued, as all of Panasenkov's talk about the murder would always devolve into attempts to prove that Sokolov's academic achievements should be reevaluated, and that despite what people think, he's not a real historian. Similarly, Sokolov and his defense team would spend numerous hours reading critical reviews of Panasenkov and his book in attempts to prove to the court discussing a murder case that Panasenkov is not a real historian, and Panasenkov's presence in this seemingly unrelated criminal case would only grow stronger. Immediately after his arrest, Sokolov obtained a lawyer, Alexander Pachuyev, notorious for often defending seemingly irredeemable subjects, and who also represented a class action against the pop star Madonna for propaganda of homosexuality, which was dismissed. Many saw his decision to represent Sokolov as another cynical attempt to make a name and money on a scandalous case, as his non-stop TV appearances deemed either pointless or outright detrimental to the case. In the first days after the murder, Pachuyev said to the journalists, quote, "Currently, the defense has more than a dozen versions of what may have happened, right down to mystical ones. It is autumn currently. Many different exacerbations are happening. I have already received several audio recordings in which people are trying to explain everything that happened by some paranormal events. For example, by the fact that Oleg Valerievich was forced to do this by some outsiders. Of course, nobody seriously considers these versions, but they exist." End quote. Soon many news sources started to refer to Pachuyev as mystical lawyer because of his love to talk about what he called mystical coincidences in Sokolov's case, but the statement that solidified Pachuyev as a victim of perpetual mocking was his suggestion that Sokolov might have been influenced to commit the murder by the moon cycle. Quote, "Recently, psychology experts raised an interesting question about the moon, which was in its active phase at the time of the incident. It was 3 days before the full moon, and it's a well-known medical fact that many onsets of schizophrenia occur at this time." End quote. When the trial began, Alexander Pachuyev was fired. One of the lawyers that came to replace him was the same lawyer that defended Sokolov in his civil disputes with Panasenkov, Alexander Turgashev, who at that time worked as a law teacher at St. Petersburg State University. Though by that time Sokolov was fired, Anastasia's mother considered that through Turgashev, the university continued giving support to Oleg, but the university saw the actions and positions of their teacher as separate from their own and denied any ethical violations on their part. Turgashev tried to restore Sokolov's reputation not only in the eyes of the law, but also in the eyes of the public by creating a blog called The Truth About Sokolov's Bullying, was both divided into 10 chapters, where he meticulously recollects their feud with Panasenkov while supplementing it with his own speculations or outright conspiratorial theories meant to paint Sokolov as a victim of purposefully organized harassment that drove him to the psychological demise. Generally, one of the biggest concerns that would haunt Sokolov throughout the trial, besides the perspective of spending his life in jail, was his rotting reputation and public opinion. He constantly addressed that his case is manipulated by journalists who, in their urge for sensations, unfairly paint a monstrous image of his persona while ignoring the awfulness of the other side. For this reason, he actively tried to defame Anastasia's character, and one of those attempts led to the first of many hysterical outbursts that Sokolov would endlessly show throughout the trial. It happened when at some point the court started to discuss whether Anastasia's private messages should be inspected publicly. The prosecution argued that they should be read in a closed hearing, while the defense demanded an open hearing. Suddenly, the following happened.
Прошу их исследовать в открытом судебном заседании.
Сергей Сергеевич, я могу свое мнение высказать?
Да, конечно.
значит, я настаиваю на том, чтобы эти вещественные доказательства были объявлены в открытом заседании, потому что иначе будет нарушен паритет прав. В этих доказательствах видно, что делала пострадавшая, какими страшными оскорблениями она употребляла, какие страшные вещи она мне писала, как она оскорбляла моих детей. Если это сокрыть от людей, тогда будет нарушено правосудие. Это категорически. Это собственно говоря, нарушено все. Нейтралитет суда. Это значит, суд полностью становится на сторону обвинения и отказывается от того, чтобы выслушать нашу сторону. Чудовищное оскорбление. Оскорбление в адрес моих детей. Мой адрес. И это все есть. К счастью, это зафиксировано. И это должны люди увидеть. Обязательно.
Соколов, вы успокойтесь, пожалуйста.
Это ужасно, потому что это чудовищно. Потому что то, что там высказано, то, что она там говорит, это омерзительно, это гнусно. И только узнав эти вещи, люди могут понять, что произошло. Без этого вы скрываете тогда, вы скрываете от людей. А сейчас за счет прессы создалось чудовищное отношение ко мне, потому что люди этого не знают. Люди думают, что это была чистая невинная девочка. То, что она творила, там есть часть маленькая того, что она творила. Это только ничтожная часть. Так это люди должны увидеть.
У вас все нормально?
Что это?
Все хорошо вы себя чувствуете, чтобы так громко говорить?
Я говорю громко, потому что это очень важно. Это принципиально.
Хорошо. Мы не глухи, поэтому кричать так не надо.
Если вы откажетесь на это, значит вы действуете под давлением прессы, которая создала мне жутко отрицательный облик и которая скрывает ту сторону, что там творилось с той стороны.
Подсудимому Соколову объявляется замечание в судебном заседании за то, что он не соблюдает порядок, значит, повышает голос и делает какие-то замечания председательствующему судье.
The public review of Anastasia's messages did nothing to improve his image. Oleg was never able to understand how his behavior was perceived by people whose opinions he tried to affect, and so his self-victimization, hysterical complaints, theatrical screams, and emotional meltdowns continued throughout the whole trial, and it constantly held him on the edge of being charged with contempt of court. The lesson he was able to take, however, was to talk about Anastasia more positively from now on, and insert his defamatory claims between pretentious declarations of love. He stated that the rifle stylized as 19th century French cavalry pistol was actually obtained by Anastasia. The reason why she had access to illegal weaponry was because for a long time she was cheating on Oleg with a confirmed real-life criminal wanted by Interpol because of numerous armed robberies and who was put in a foreign prison in 2019. Together they were planning a scheme to somehow steal Sokolov's property, and that was the only reason why she continued staying with Oleg. Curiously, according to Sokolov's own words, this information was gathered by him after the murder from the cellmate that sat with him in a pre-trial detention center. The reason why this completely random person suddenly had information about Anastasia's affair with a wanted criminal was allegedly because his cellmate had extremely deep knowledge and connections in a world of crime. Whether Sokolov and his defense team simply fabricated a lie, or if Sokolov was actually pranked by his cellmate, remains uncertain. Sokolov's general recollection of events of the murder itself went through numerous changes with time. According to the testimony of the police officer, when Oleg was interrogated in the hospital, he confessed to shooting Anastasia in the head 4 times when she was lying on the bed. He backed his testimony with a video of interrogation, but it was recorded on a cell phone behind Sokolov's back and was generally conducted with major violations of interrogation procedure, so it wasn't admissible as evidence. For some time, Sokolov relied on a version that ultimately exploited all possible legal excuses available, He stated that he doesn't remember anything, that it was an accident, and that it was self-defense. All those three justifications he combined into one story. He claimed that after he mentioned his children, Anastasia suddenly became extremely aggressive, grabbed a knife, and started cutting a scarf that Oleg had gifted to her. He grabbed the rifle and shot in the air to calm her down, but after this, she started running towards him with a knife. Then, he accidentally shot in her direction, and after that, experienced memory loss. Why he decided to scare her off with a rifle instead of a traumatic gun that he also had wasn't explained, and soon the whole version proved to be impossible. The final line of defense that the team stuck to was admitting that Oleg indeed committed the murder of Anastasia, but between making the first shot and finding the package with the arms in the river, he had a complete memory loss, and all his actions in this period were conducted in a state of pathological affect, in which a person experiences such intense emotions that he completely loses the ability to control or recognize his actions. The reason such an episode occurred was due to a prolonged psychotraumatic situation that slowly devastated Sokolov's psyche. Specifically, the harassment that he received from Panasenkov and his fans. The defense substantiated Panasenkov's relevance to the psychological episode by drawing attention to Oleg's search history. It is an established fact that an hour or less before the murder, Sokolov was watching YouTube, and one of the videos that he clicked on was Panasenkov's freshly released 2-hour upload, where he celebrates his victory in the St. Petersburg civil trial.
Я обнаружил возможную причину такого тревожного поведения Олега. Он несколько лет назад был избит по голове. Это было в 2014 году, о чем есть постановление о передаче материалов в суд город Можайск. Услышали шум, доносящийся из палатки Соколова. Подойдя к палатке Соколова, увидели, как Соколов и Мишанин Д.А. громко ругались, держали друг друга за одежду. Так. Между ними возникла конфликтная ситуация, в результате которой Мишанин Д.А. ударил рукой ему в лицо, причинив тем самым физическую боль. Это сила. Да! Давай. Смотри, ты чувствуешь? Нет, испытывай к нему, испытывай! И снимай пиджак, испытывай, да! И подходи к нему, и наноси удары!
According to the version of the defense, seeing this video after a heated argument caused Sokolov to have a full-on emotional breakdown, which found its release in the murder of Anastasia. Throughout the trial, Panasenkov's name was brought up by the defense so often that the lawyer of Anastasia's family denounced them for overshadowing the victim, and seemingly this paranoia resided beyond purely calculated legal strategy, as some of Sokolov's accusations turned out to be so unplanned and bizarre that it made it seem possible that Sokolov earnestly believed that the most horrific situation of his life was somehow part of a conspiracy conducted by his YouTube rival. When Ekaterina flew to Russia to give a testimony from which we know her full story, Sokolov accused her of being bribed by Panasenkov to act as a false witness, despite her never interacting with Yevgeny in any way. Once Sokolov noticed that the lawyer of Anastasia's family constantly checks her phone during court hearings and said that she receives messages from Panasenkov, who controls her by giving orders.
А это сейчас, снимала точек, будешь выкладывать в интернет. Я знаю, что через 5 минут это буду Панасенкова, потому что здесь сидит представитель не потерпевшей стороны, а представитель Панасенкова, который каждую секунду переписывается с Панасенковым. Это он будет сейчас выкладывать. Вот что вы сейчас сделали.
Так, вам замечание за неуважительное отношение к участникам процесса.
At At some point, Sokolov even proclaimed that the whole trial is orchestrated by Panasenkov and that the murder was part of his scheme. He explains that the reason why Anastasia suddenly became more aggressive towards him in the last couple months was not only because of her criminal lover, but also because she was recruited by Panasenkov's people who manipulated her to take their side and go against Oleg. It is known that before the crucial night, she was visiting historical archives in Moscow, but according to Oleg, in actuality she visited the capital to attend Panasenkov's quote-unquote headquarters, where they created a plan for how to take Sokolov down. The scheme was to provoke Oleg in a way where he would punch Anastasia in the face, then they would go to the police and use the scandal as a final nail in the coffin of Sokolov's public reputation. For this reason, when she came back home, she suddenly started insulting him, but Sokolov not only didn't hit her, but didn't even insulted her back. When she ran to the street, she probably jumped into Panasenkov's car that was parked near their house to take further orders considering their plan didn't work. Panasenkov ordered her to go back and continue provoking Oleg to finally receive the punch in the face that they needed. But Panasenkov didn't know that his plan would go out of hand and Anastasia would, quote-unquote, die. Sokolov's general outlook is perfectly characterized in his final word, which reads in part, quote, "Before I say anything, I want to express my deep and complete repentance for what I have done. I not only believe that I should be punished according to the law, but I also want to be punished in order to atone for the crime I committed. But there is one thing. I want to be punished fairly for what I did and not for what the media accuse me of. A number of journalists, greedy for sensations, who themselves chose a crime that would sell as one. A terrible sadist, Professor Moriarty from the Sherlock Holmes novels, and the young innocent girl whom he kills to satisfy his sadistic complexes. And this nonsense, despite the absolute evidence of the truth, constantly continues to be propagated. One of the things that didn't reach people, and therefore public opinion, as the reason that caused such sharp hostility from a young woman with whom I had been connected for many years by strong and sincere love. We're talking about the persecution that Anastasia and I were subjected to, both of us, by a villain named Panasenkov. This vile harassment, of which there is ample evidence, lasted for 2 years, but already 6 months after it started, Anastasia broke down. Crushed by the flow of dirty fabrications that my enemy spread on the internet, Anastasia decided to punish me for mostly made-up actions. She entered into an intimate relationship with a mature man, but not just a man, but an experienced repeat criminal who was wanted by Investigative Committee of Russia and Interpol. While having lost her feelings for me, she decided to stay, but now solely for lucrative reasons. My apartment in St. Petersburg, and her academic career. I believe that Anastasia went to Moscow to meet a person or people who, at the beginning of September, came into close contact with her in order to achieve a brutal blow against me. I believe that my enemies promised her a job, a career, and God knows what else in Moscow. But the price for these prospects was a loud breakup with me, and not just a breakup, but a breakup that would cause a catastrophe in my personal and professional life. Anastasia was probably required to provoke me to punch her, and then a black eye, the police, my dismissal from the university, a story promoted on the internet, my complete destruction as a person who is respected. Only one person was interested in this, a certain citizen, Panasenkov. It was not a coincidence that his lawyer, a few days before the tragedy, when he was leaving a courthouse where our civil trial took place, said to my lawyer triumphantly, "Let Oleg Valerievich prepare for big surprises." And he repeated this phrase twice while bursting with evil triumph. The surprise for me was supposed to be Anastasia, who became a tool in the hands of those people, or rather inhuman monsters. Instead of breaking up with me calmly, she rushed at me like a missile, with fury and wild anger, incomprehensible to me then. Now I know where it came from. She died, and my life is completely ruined. That life is no longer there. There is no scientific life, no social life, no life with thousands of people who loved me. My friends, my soldiers, my officers. I don't have a life anymore. If Anastasia's mother was in front of me now, and I could put a gun in her hands, I would gladly stand in front of her, even on my knees, and ask, if you think that I could have done this in cold blood, shoot me. I would gladly accept such a death. But whatever the punishment, it will inevitably overtake me. I am in the hands of justice, and as we can see, points at the lawyer of Anastasia's mother, a very cruel justice. One way or another, I will atone for my terrible mistake with torment, but while I am in prison, monsters who have been preparing this tragedy for a long time, and the main villain, who upon learning of the tragedy, posted a video on the internet where he is dancing with joy and declares that everything went according to his script, he is free. And to Anastasia's parents, I would like to say, I am punished, my life is destroyed. I can say that I will remain a prisoner for the rest of my life because I will not survive it. I want your righteous anger to be directed at the monster who has been preparing our destruction for 2 years, who danced with joy at the news of Anastasia's death, the monster who ruined our happiness, the happiness of people who sincerely loved each other for 3.5 years. It was sincere, devoted love, real love. Anastasia's parents, of course I understand that it's a sin to ask for forgiveness, but I would like to beg on my knees for at least a little mercy. Forgive a person who has gone crazy from everything he has been through, and I'm asking Anastasia's parents to try to understand that their daughter was the strongest love and the last love of my life, and that this love was snatched from us, snatched away by real monsters. I don't know how such people live in the world, how the earth carries them. I could never imagine that this would happen to me. I never knew such people existed. For 2 years they broke and broke and broke and finally destroyed our lives. That's all I wanted to say. Judicial psychiatric experts concluded that Sokolov completely understood his actions and they were not committed in a state of affect, but the strategy of the defense remained the same. While there was enough evidence to prove that some form of harassment towards Sokolov indeed existed, his attorneys did everything in their power to exaggerate it, and the most helpful witness in this task turned out to be Alexander Lepihov, the most confusing figure of the trial. Lepihov is an actor with a criminal record that includes assault and rape. He participated as a witness against Panasenkov in 2 defamation trials of Sokolov and also recorded a couple of videos where he tries to expose Yevgeny. When Sokolov was charged with murder, Lepihov appeared in a trial again as a witness from the side of the defense, where he supported the version that Panasenkov purposefully tried to drive Sokolov insane. He claimed that once he was part of Panasenkov's entourage and witnessed how he organized the infamous provocation with kicked out students at Sokolov's lecture through the phone. Lepihov also claimed that Panasenkov asked him to hire a group of tough guys, go to St. Petersburg, catch Oleg in a dark alley, beat him up, put him on his knees, piss on him, and use him sexually, while recording everything on a phone. By the end of the testimony, a very annoyed judge asked if Lepihov understood that providing a false testimony is a punishable offense. He replied that he understood. Many months later, after Sokolov received his final sentence, Lepihov suddenly uploaded a photo where he holds a written confession that was presumably delivered to the police, where he admits that he was bribed by Sokolov and his lawyers to act as a false witness. Some articles even describe an explanatory YouTube video where he shows bank transactions with a bribe reaching 325,000 rubles, but things that they provide now lead to the deleted video, which remains lost. Even if this confession actually reached authorities, nothing seemingly came out of it. But even such extreme testimonies never resolved the issue of non-existing evidence that would prove that Panasenkov had any influence on Anastasia or even ever interacted with her. That was until the appearance of a witness who promised to completely change the trajectory of the whole case and showed that Sokolov's conspiracy theory wasn't that crazy after all. While Sokolov was kept in jail to the end of his trial, he still had access to all his email letters that were transmitted to him in a printed form by the guards. One day, among those letters, appeared a message from a woman named Zhanna Ruzavina. Her letter read in part, quote, "Mr. Sokolov, I understand the gravity of your crime, but I also cannot remain silent. The court should know this. I tried to follow the whole case in the media, and I recently read that you suspected your girlfriend of infidelity. I cannot know her entire personal life, but I am a restaurant administrator, and I saw how Panasenkov, who was persecuting you as many say, often visited us, was her. He usually, most of the time, rented a separate room in our restaurant, ordered food, but little was eaten, which is why it stuck in my head. Last November, I saw a photo of the girl on a talk show and recognized her. Panasenkov was also on the talk show, but he, like it was deliberate, kept silent about the fact that he knew her personally. And it turns out that almost a day before the murder, she was with Panasenkov in our restaurant. I am absolutely sure that they were in a relationship. I don't know what attracted her to this pompous guy. Maybe just his youth and good looks. As a woman, I just don't like men like him, but she was still very inexperienced. I don't want to lose my job, but maybe the police can track down with whom she visited us. I hope the letter reaches you somehow. I also sent it to your attorney. But I want to repeat, I understand and don't want to justify the severity of what you've done." End quote. Finally, after all those months, Sokolov found a witness that could prove his theory. He immediately started writing her back, begging Zhanna to report more information to his attorneys, but the woman didn't feel the same urgency. In the letters that followed, she expressed extreme hesitance to appear in court, as she was afraid that exposing Panasenkov might somehow lead to her being fired from her job and worsen her financial struggles. This subtly hinted at a wish of some monetary support. Her prolonged resilience probably significantly tickled Oleg's nerves, and so he continued his attempts to convince her to testify as soon as possible by enabling all his charm. In one of the last letters, Ruzavina wrote, quote, "Hello, Oleg Valeryevich. I understand your situation, and I really sympathize with you. I was wondering how to help you without harming myself. I'm ready to testify, but I still ask you to understand me. I live alone, raising a 4-year-old child all by myself. It so happens that I don't have a husband at the moment. I am very afraid for my job. I need to somehow secure myself financially, and this also worries me. Could that enemy of yours, Panasenkov, be dangerous? You will know who I am, where I work. I need to know all this. You have many years behind your back, and you need to understand that those services come with a price. I am risking a lot for you by doing this. I have been deceived before and ended up having to feed myself, my mother, and my child all alone. But I was looking things about you on the internet, how you speak on historical topics. You feel like a real man, someone I can rely on and whom I can trust. I am very sorry that you're in this situation, but I am ready to help if you're also willing to get into my position." End quote. At that point, their exchange lasted for numerous weeks. Feeling like the crucial moment is just a step away, the defense team asked the judge to postpone the hearings until their witness finally arrives. Sokolov screamed, quote, "That witness will confirm that Panasenkov set Yashenko on me virtually as a weapon of his crime. They will show that those meetings took place. You will learn things that completely blow your mind and minds of millions of people. Judge postponed the hearings for the triumph of justice. If this witness would not be called in right now and would be declined, I assure you, I will write to all news sources and will write to President of our country, because I think that Panasenkov is the main killer. He's the main organizer." End quote. And though the judge agreed to invite the witness, Zhanna Ruzavina never came to the court, because Zhanna Ruzavina never existed. And the person who wrote those letters while pretending to be her was Yevgeny Panasenkov himself. A elaborate prank was unraveled in the middle of the same court hearing.
Говорю, вот сейчас мне порядка 10 сообщений пришло на телефон, которое свидетельствует о том, что в интернете, в СМИ появилась информация, что вот эта переписка Олега Валерьевича, как я понимаю, если я не ошибаюсь, с какой-то Жанной Рузавиной, правильно? У вас была переписка?
Не отвечаю. Да?
Нет,
я вообще не могу отвечать.
И эта вся переписка с вами является фейковой, и сведения в средствах массовой информации об этом имеется.
Дело в том, что в СИЗО, где находится Олег Валерьевич Соколов, пришло письмо от некой Жанны Рузавиной, которая так прямо и пишет и говорит о том, что вот видела за день до совершенного преступления вместе Панасенкова и Анастасию Ещенко. И вот сегодня, когда мы объявили о необходимости отложения судебного разбирательства, Евгений Панасенков в своем твиттере написал: «Сработало. Вот, товарищи СМИ, поглядите, какой хинею защита расчленителя сливает в суп».
Panasenkov later claimed that he actually wanted to go further. He wanted to appear in court as Zhanna Ruzavina by wearing a wig and a dress, but his lawyers forbidden him because of potential charges of contempt of court. Almost a year later, when Sokolov received his first sentence and entered an appeal phase in an attempt to reduce it, Panasenkov got bored and decided to test if he could pull off the same prank again. This time he created the character of Anastasia, a worker at the Institute of Brain Research with a doctorate in neurolinguistics. Anna Strelnikova wrote to Sokolov that the director of their institute probably helped Panasenkov learn a method of psychological influence that allows to distantly control people's actions, and that he used it to essentially turn Anastasia into his zombie. Somehow, Oleg Sokolov fell for it again, and Anna Strelnikova was referenced in one of his speeches.
А вот что началось в сентябре, здесь уже, очевидно, не обошлось без действительно сознательных действий. Мне прислал письмо доктор наук нейрофизиологии, нейропсихологии, который приписал, что, судя по всему, против Анастасии было применены соответствующие методы воздействия психического, и что она знает, эта женщина, которая пишет, что Панасенков как раз занимался изучением подобных методов нейропсихического воздействия на людей, фактически зомбирование, превращение человека в зомби.
But before any of those pranks were conducted, Panasenkov actually had an opportunity to appear in court as a witness himself. Throughout the whole trial, the defense was the only side that ever claimed that Panasenkov had any connections to the case, and moreover, mentioned him to the point of overshadowing the victim, accused him of bribing another victim of Sokolov, and basically blamed him for the murder he didn't commit. But when the prosecution decided to actually invite the supposed criminal, the defense suddenly started aggressively objecting to this. But the collision was inevitable, and two mortal enemies, though separated by the glass of a court cell, finally met face to face. Throughout his testimony, Panasenkov kept a book near him, the first scientific history that started it all.
Ну, и тогда скажите, пожалуйста, знаете подсудимого? Олег Валерьевич.
Вот этого?
Да, пожалуйста, знаете?
Я просто... Да, знаю, этого знаю.
Ну, какое-то неприязненное отношение у вас к нему имеется?
Нет.
Неприязненное отношение, да, имеется в виду, там, бывают долговые обязательства.
Ложь.
Нет.
Этот человек
Подождите, пожалуйста,
Как же у него нет неприязненного отношения?
Значит, я делаю замечание подсудимому.
Panasenkov said The first time they met was at the annual Borodino battle, while Oleg was passed out drunk, and then in court he saw Sokolov sober for the first time. Then Panasenkov was asked if he knew Sokolov well enough to give an assessment of his character. He responded, quote, "You see, those meetings on Borodino feud were annual, but they were not very aesthetically pleasing. It's hard to describe it around ladies. You know, there is an academic science that I do, and some marginal, pseudoscientific phenomena, like so-called reenactors. They are constantly in our line of sight and in constant communication with us through the internet, phones, conversations. So Oleg was constantly in sight all those 20 years. So I have more than thorough information about him, though not intentionally, because it wasn't pleasant getting to know him every time. He was always like a background, like music in a restaurant. From my point of view, Sokolov was a monstrously cruel, but at the same time, very comedic loser. Why? Because he always tried to be someone he's not. He was just a docent, but dreamed of being called sire. And this contradiction, this dichotomy, this dialectical pause, as I think always traumatized Oleg. At the same time, this cruelty was always reflected in his every action. You know, it's very painful for me when someone beats animals, and what he did to horses in front of everyone, my heart was bleeding. He insulted adjutants. I noticed that Oleg loves to assert himself. When somebody is weaker or lower than him, especially in all those games, he asserts himself at their expense. He can humiliate. He loves to humiliate. But the moment some official came in, not even a high official, no, a small one, of museum significance, he often dealt with Borodino Museum, he started to fawn. You know the meaning of this word, right? And this quality, as I think, reveals him as a very weak person." End quote. Later on, the prosecution brought up the accusation of the defense that Panasenkov bribed Ekaterina to give a false testimony. Before Panasenkov was able to answer, the defense started a prolonged argument that this question shouldn't be asked because of its supposed complete irrelevance to the case. Expectedly, Panasenkov answered no. When it was time of the defense to present their relevant questions, the first thing they asked was if Panasenkov had a historical degree. Curiously, the video of the testimony that Panasenkov would later upload on his YouTube channel misses some sections where he answers the questions of the defense, specifically moments that some considered lying on a stand. One of the cut-off questions was about the creation of videos where he insults Sokolov. Panasenkov said that he's not only never insulted Oleg, but never even created or uploaded any videos on YouTube, because he doesn't know how to do this, and any videos where he presumably talks about Oleg were probably recorded in the same way passing strangers record him on the street every day, which implies that the 2-hour responses where he sits in front of the camera while trashing Sokolov were recorded by strangers without his knowledge or active participation in the production. After half an hour of what some considered roasting, it was finally Sokolov's turn to ask questions.
Вы говорите, что никакой травли не было. В течение 2 лет я получил от вас, от ваших подельников, угрозы. Я лично, Анастасия Ещенко, ваши подельники взламывали ее переписку. Мне лично присылали на мой телефон угрозу, что мое тело будет болтаться, так сказать, в холодной воде. Это все делали ваши подельники. Неоднократно. В этих высказываниях вас называли маэстро. Это вас называют маэстро. Так вот, говорили, что ты заплатишь за маэстро. А вы смеетесь? 2 года. 2 года вы издевались над нами. 2 года вы травили нас. Вы не знаете ничего об этой травле?
Нет, Олег, об этом я ничего не знаю.
Я не Олег, а Олег Валерьевич. Есть вопрос. Кто писал эти угрозы мне на мой мобильный телефон, на мой интернет-адрес, а также Анастасии? Кто писал эти угрозы? Вам они, эти люди, знакомы?
Олег, дело
не Олег, а Олег Валерьевич.
Олег Валерьевич. Нет, вот все, что вы перечислили, для меня это странно, дико, непонятно, оскорбляет, и вы знаете, если честно, уже, я вам скажу откровенно, возмущает.
Да, пожалуйста, еще есть вопрос?
Еще вопрос. Вы говорите, что вы представляете научное сообщество. Вы, не имеющий диплома, который вы не дали диплом университета. Каким образом вы представляете научное сообщество?
Так, ну давайте это, наверное...
Давайте я отвечу. Я представляю...
Участники процесса.
Вы не рекламируете ваш книгу.
At the end, Oleg Sokolov proclaimed that the persecution side has no morals or humanity for inviting such person to the court. After Sokolov received his final sentence and went to prison, mentions of him in Panasenkov's videos mostly ceased. In one of the last ones, Yevgeny thanks Oleg for the insane PR of his monograph by pretending to assemble a gift box that would help Sokolov survive in prison. The gift box included baby shampoo, dog food for small and medium breeds, a pink toilet brush, a lollipop shaped as a blue cock, lubrication fluid, an eggplant, and a shirt with Panasenkov's photo.
Тогда есть. Где же справедливость тогда? Как это все не учитывать? Человек, который прожил такую жизнь, который сделал столько всего хорошего для людей, для общества, награжденный высшей наградой Франции, награжденный наградами России, которому президент России писал, так сказать, благодарственное послание за его работу. Он маньяк сумасшедший, она решила пойти на день рождения, а он взял ее, так сказать, ну как это? Вообще, как это в это можно поверить? Ну, вы же взрослые люди, ну как вы можете в это поверить, в этот абсурд?
On December 25, 2020, Oleg Sokolov was sentenced to 12.5 years in prison out of maximum 15. Harassment from Panasenkov's fans did become one among multiple factors behind the slight reduction of his sentence. During the trial, he managed to write and upload his autobiography, where he emulates a romantic spirit of 18th century historical novels when describing his life and supplements his defamatory claims about Anastasia with extremely private details of the Romans. Sokolov also offered Anastasia's family to receive fees from his historical books, but they expectedly refused. When the parents were asked if they wanted to appeal the decision of the court to potentially extend Sokolov's sentence, they replied that there was no point in that, as nothing would ever bring their daughter back. Oleg Sokolov is currently housed in Correctional Facility number 6 in St. Petersburg. There he works as a librarian and is the founder of the Historical Club, where he teaches prisoners. He speaks very positively about the conditions of his confinement, quality of which seems to surpass that of average prison, and, according to some rumors, he maintains contact with a couple of his female fans, one of whom he wants to marry. He also tried to escape prison by signing contract with Russian military and going to war to atone for his guilt with blood, as his lawyer describes, but was declined due to his old age and poor health. While under arrest, he tried to sue the national TV and his ex Ekaterina for defamation, but lost. Half a year after his sentence, the Moscow court changed the decision on the outcome of his civil trial with Panasenkov, and the once proud victory that meant to clean his name from plagiarism accusations suddenly slipped away. So, while still imprisoned, he and his lawyer spent years trying to bring this victory back by appealing the decision again and again and again. Their last recorded attempt dates back to the summer of 2023.
На вашей улице перевернулся грузовик с пряниками. Вашу правоту доказывает вот это кровавое убийство. Понимаете? И вот сейчас от вас зависит, от вашей ответственности, от вашей буквально вменяемости, да, дальнейшая судьба наполеоновского буквально всего движения в России. Вы это понимаете, Евгений?
Абсолютно понимаю. Я вам более того хочу сказать, что в чем основная причина? Потому что вот Олег утверждает, что Наполеон это он, а на самом деле ведь Наполеон это я, это очевидно.
Господи.